All right. Thank you. I'm Kenny Zagira, Chairman, Kenya Cybersecurity and Forensics Association. I was really waiting for this meeting to begin. Then I was just somewhere, all of a sudden the power decides to go off. But that's the beauty of having cybersecurity, cyber forensics on a hot sunny day like this. Thank you. Kenya Cybersecurity and Forensics Association is basically a membership-based association duly registered by the Registrar of Societies of Kenya. And for avoidance of doubt, it's non-political and non-partisan. The group began way back in 2016, and it has basically three types of people on board. We have the law enforcement teams, those who are interested in digital issues about digital investigations. We have the legal practitioners, those who are basically interested in matters as electronic evidence management and cyber security, cyber forensic. And also we have the ICT, the so-called the techies. I know not all ICT practitioners are interested in security. So those who are interested in matters cyber security, they are part of this. And that will mean you is attending today, you are eligible to become a member. Number two, when you talk about Kenya Cybersecurity and Forensics Association, basically we are bringing two limbs together. Now we talk of matter cybersecurity. That means all the best practices, things that need to happen before an incident occurs. Talk of best practices, managerial controls, technical controls. That fits in cybersecurity. And if you want to know more, you can even get that definition of cybersecurity from Kenya Information and Communication Amendment Act of 2013. Yeah, that law that talks about mobile registration and all that. Remember Westgate? Around that time, they defined cybersecurity. So matters that happened before, yeah, that is cybersecurity. And then matters thereafter, at times, the best practices amount to nothing. So here's when a matter of evidence is required. How do you even image the deleted files? So we talk of cyber forensics. How do we bring that matter before a tribunal so that the evidential value can be of something at the end of the day? So cybersecurity and cyber forensics, that's whom we are. Those are the people who attend, law enforcement, legal practitioners, and ICT practitioners. And of course, even the enthusiasts, those who want to know much about this. Our main objective basically is to do cybersecurity awareness, cyber forensics awareness, to also do some research, usually come up with innovations, and much of it, we're also keen to bring up professionals who have good grounding on cybersecurity and cyber forensics. This we have begun doing. Well, I won't say much about Kenya Cybersecurity and Forensics Association for now. Much of it you can get in our website, www.kcsfa.co.ke, and welcome to be a member. Much question you can ask, but then let me take it back to Harriet so that we introduce the first speaker. And in addition to that, before I forget, this is 30th. We're beginning, so October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And we felt we now need to begin this in style. So along the month, we'll be having various activities, which we also welcome you to participate in. And thank you so much. Harriet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kenny. I will want to take this opportunity to introduce the first speaker. And the first speaker this afternoon is Evelyn Kasina. And just before she gets on board, we would like to introduce to the audience here, or to the participants, who Evelyn Kasina is. Basically, Evelyn is a family IT consultant and a digital learning leader specializing in digital literacy and online safety for children, and helping those within the ecosystem of the child, that is the parents, the teachers, and the educators, to create conducive environments for children to thrive. She does this through different program trainings using her company called Eve Minette Communication Solutions Limited. In addition to this, she consults for Facebook on digital parenting frameworks for sub-Saharan Africa, training parents and children on digital skills and online safety. She is a Kenyan implementing partner with Google Africa on their Be Internet Awesome campaign, which seeks to educate and equip children with skills and tools to use the internet safely and productively. This campaign is done in collaboration with schools. She works with the Ministry of Education through Kenya Private Sector Alliance on the implementation of digital skills and values in education and creating appropriate frameworks for school adoption. Evelyn, thank you so much for accepting to be one of our keynote speakers on this particular day and afternoon. And we warmly welcome you to online so that you can be able to speak to the participants this afternoon. Thank you so much, Evelyn, and you're welcome.
Asante sana, Harriet. Even for that introduction, it makes me feel so big. I'm a very tiny person, big impacted influence. That's what I like to believe. And today I'm the one who is going to kick off this session with child online protection, which is a topic that is very dear to my heart. Just today, I was honored to be part of the team that was launching child online safety campaign phase 2 with the Communications Authority of Kenya. And our government is very active and participating. Our First Lady was the one who chaired and opened up that campaign. So it is important for us to realize that as we are seated here, we are doing this at the right time, because this is the time where impact should be seen. And it is a time where all of us need to pull up our efforts, different capacity efforts, to be able to make sure that when our children are enjoying the internet, which is an amazing thing, the internet is a beautiful place to be. Our children need to be safe because they're vulnerable, and they need to be able to be productive and engage with each other and engage with content productively and safely. So for me today, I'm going to try as much as possible not to talk about any jargon. So should I lose you somewhere when we're having a Q&A, please ask what you didn't understand, but I'll make sure that the content, I have tried to make sure that the content is not techie, so that at least you can relate to it. And the things that we are going to discuss, I'm just hoping that if one thing sticks to you, you go home and implement it. So for me, that is my desire. And Harriet, I think there's somebody who is projecting, so I think if they're able to allow me to share my screen, if that is possible.
On it.
Thank you. So of course, I know we are seated here in very different capacities. I am happy and really looking forward to even listening to the other speakers, because I saw something about offensive security, which, by the way, if my son, who is 10 years old, were to be asked what is offensive security, the first thing he would say is mommy or daddy putting softwares and blocking sites and putting softwares in their machines. That is making them not go through the different applications and sites that they would really love to, and especially like games and stuff like that. So I know that is not what we are going to discuss in terms of offensive security, but that, according to my son, is offensive security. So even as we are waiting to learn and listen to the other speakers, I hope there's something that you will relate to, and I really hope that there's something that you will go home and implement. Yeah. So allow me to just share my screen now. Thank you. I have access. I have access, yes. So we will not be doing any technical jargon, as I said earlier. And here today, I just want to talk about your role as a parent. If you're a parent here, an aspiring parent, or you're somebody who's within the ecosystem of a child, be it a guardian or an educator, because also we have different roles that we play in the society in terms of being around the children. So this forum is for you, parent, an aspiring parent, an educator, a guardian. We need to be able to know what roles we can play in terms of child online protection. And even as we are going through this, I want you to think about this as a digital training, a digital parenting training, where I'm trying to give you skills or tools to make you parent like a pro. So I love giving people exercises to think. So normally, if you meditate or you do yoga, people are told close your eyes and evaluate, but I'm not going to ask you to close your eyes. I just want you to think about your family tech usage. Just think about how people are using technology in their home, from yourselves to everybody across the household, and then ask yourself, is what they access right for them, right? Is it right for them? Because one of the biggest headaches, and I know, communicating and training parents and talking to parents, one of the biggest headaches is first the content that children are accessing, and then the second biggest headache is the time. They're spending so much time online. And if you have a child who is in 844 CBC, as of today, I think they're at home for like I think the next 1 week or so, right? Which means they and for those who are in boarding especially, they have this time and these movies and games that ni kama ziko kwa backlog. They are queuing the things that they need to watch. Some of them will end up binge watching. They will binge play. They want to be on social media to catch up with the people whom they left like 3 months ago, and catch up. And it is not a bad thing, as I said earlier. Being on the internet and using the internet is an amazing thing, but then we need to be able to know our role as parents. How can we guide them so that while they're enjoying doing what they need to do, they're doing it safely and they're also being productive? So I am here today to help you and families to stay safe online, to achieve a balance and create a healthy relationship with technology. And then also, hopefully, I will help you just note your role when it comes to COP, because there are different roles that we can play in society, not just being parents, okay? So there's a photo here of a dad and a girl. So she must be a girl, and there's a dad there, and they have a computer in front of them. They seem to be engaging with something. So your role as a parent is first to embrace digital controls, and probably after this training, be intentional to just applying some of the things. So hopefully you have a pen and paper where you can just scribble something, so that at least you're able to see what is the one thing that I can go and do. Put screen time measures, or let's have a discussion, something that you can go home and apply, and it is not going to stress you. It is going to start helping you manage your environment where your children are spending a lot of time. So let's continue reflecting, and as we are reflecting and getting into the depth of the training, I want you to observe these two photos and then feel. I need a feeling to come to you. I need a feeling. A friend of mine, when I posted the first photo, which is somebody's hands or with a handcuff, the one word they used was bondage. So I don't know what word comes to your mouth or mind. But I think if I'm going to be fair and I need us to engage, please chat on the I'm sure the chat probably is open. Please put your thoughts, your feelings, your answers on what you see, because there is that one where we feel like we are prisoners of this technology, which by the way is not a good feeling, I know. But then sometimes we also feel like our children are so hooked. I don't use the word addiction, because I think we are misusing the word addiction. Probably is that we are over dependent on technology. It could be that that is the feeling that you have. And if it is, please share on the chat forum, so that at least we're able to also get feedback from you, and say in future, because we are also creating awareness throughout October, we are able to also give you very concrete ways to manage that feeling that has come to you. But then there is this second picture that for me, the first one shows how technology can make us be together physically but away from each other. So we are totally disconnected, right? We are here together, and this is something that is very real in at least every home. You have seen this, right? Once upon a time, maybe you did something about it. Or currently, it is happening in your home, where your child is somewhere trying to read a book, trying to do something, but your screen, it probably doesn't have to be in the middle of that chair, but it is always in front of you. And when your children are trying to seek for your attention, you start doing this. Give me 1 minute, give me 1 minute, 2 seconds, just I'm on a phone call. I know these are words that we use frequently. And at the era where we are working from home, sometimes our students are learning from home, we have even symbols where you just raise your eyes, like your eyes open up in a way that your children are like, mommy is not being disturbed right now, daddy is working. And it makes the feeling that comes to my heart is that technology can be a very bad master, but a very good servant, right? So we need to be able to learn from this that yes, technology, we have already invited it. And I think from 2020, when the pandemic hit us, it is inevitable that we cannot do without it. But there is a way that we can avoid being prisoners, or we can avoid feeling that bondage where the technology has literally taken over our lives and we are under one roof, but people are completely disconnected because we are all trying to catch up with everything else apart from ourselves. Okay, so I want you to look at the ecosystem that is in front of you. This is what I use. I developed it for my business. And I want you to look at the roles and your position, okay? So probably you're here, you're a parent. You're the first primary line of influence to your child. Primary, because teaching starts at home. Before you take your child to school, it starts at home. Guidance starts from home. And at home, this is where so many things happen. By the time you're creating a value system, you're creating rules and boundaries, and there are places where you want to visit. All those things are domiciled at home. So your home is the first place where your children should feel secure, but also you knowing that you are the first line of influence. Yeah. Then probably you're here because you're an educator, or you're a guardian, but most probably an educator, where apart from the house, you do connect and associate with kids in a larger space. So probably you're in an educational center, or you're in the policy in education. Doesn't matter. You run a club and your primary customers are children. You're in the second line of influence when it comes to child online protection. Then the third one is the society. You and I who are seated here, probably you're above 25, if so. We grew up playing outside. Our society, quote unquote, was me knowing my neighbor and my neighbor and my neighbor. And when you're not in one city, you're up country, probably somewhere also knowing your cousins and your neighbors. We grew up in that kind of setting. But right now, your child has physical friends, but they also have virtual friends. And they have virtual friends from multiple platforms. So imagine your child is on WhatsApp, they're on Telegram, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, because I know they're not on Facebook. And then they play Call of Duty, they play Roblox. I'm counting now, I'm at 6. And I know there are very many other spaces where our children are interacting. They probably are watching Netflix, they're on Hulu, they're on Amazon TV. Those spaces have become their new society. So in addition to the school where they have physical friends, in addition to your home setup where they have physical friends and maybe up country if they go, they now have a new set of society where they interact with people and they really don't need to get out of their beds. They really don't need to get out of the comfort of their home. And all this information is coming to them just in front of a screen that can be as small as a phone. So I want you to think about that when you see that their society has really, really, really morphed. Yeah. And then to add, maybe they're doing some schoolwork and in their school they're using artificial intelligence, right? So that is an added societal influence for them. And then, of course, you might be here and you are in a space where you influence policy, you're in government, you're in an NGO, or you're in a space where you influence some sort of controls, even like, the way the police control. We have the DCI, we have the Department of Children's Services. You're in that level. If you're a parent but you're still in that level, you play two roles, because you also come in at the level where we need protection, we need guidance, we need policy. And I know in this space we have government, we have platform holders, we have people in the civil society, we have lawyers. You come into that space because in your day-to-day work, your work revolves around making sure there is protection for children in different spheres. So all of us here have different roles, but because we are supposed to be focusing on probably role 1, role 2, role 3, but even role 4, if we can, we need to be able to see where our brains need to be, and we need to look at where our efforts need to start at home, because everybody goes back home, and at home you have a lot of influence. Okay. Right, so I want you to think about how your children use the internet. What kind of apps do they use? What kind of content do they consume? And by the way, when I'm having this kind of trainings, and I hope the chat is going to be active, when I'm having this kind of trainings, I accept answers like, I do not know. That is a perfect answer, because if you don't know, honestly, you don't know. And there is no punishment for that. What I want you to do, if you ask yourself this question, what kind of apps are my children using, or kind of content do they consume? If you don't know, one of the things that I want you to do after this training is to try and know. That is being intentional, because we read stories, we read articles, we watch movies of other children's children in other countries, things happening to them. But what we don't understand is those things are also happening at home. But what is very shocking is they could happen in your own home. You are not special. The fact that you have internet at home, or at least you have an internet enabled gadget in your house, that insecurity can come to you. So it's not about other people's children. Start thinking it about your own children. And because you can take advantage of them being at home for a week, you can ask them, by the way, what apps make you happy? When you go to the phone, what do you like using? How does it make you feel? What do you post and what do you consume? Such kind of questions give you a position to interact with your children, so that at least if you're to make them safe, you know where to start. It can't be from guesswork. You need to be able to understand from their setting how they interact with technology, what they're consuming, so that you're able to start guiding them from a place of information. All right. And then there's something that I saw today. In fact, today, as I was listening to some of the speeches that were being done, there is some sad BBC article that a 6-year-old girl swallowed like about 23 or 26 magnets, swallowed 26 magnets, I think. It was 23 or 26. And she was trying to imitate somebody who has a tongue piercing. And they saw that on a TikTok challenge. So I was telling children this morning, when I was doing a parade somewhere, I was telling children this morning, it is very important for us to understand that when we were growing up, we used to call them pranks. But we teach our children what pranks are. And even when they're learning, they get to understand what pranks are. But nowadays, that word has evolved. For them, a prank can easily be a challenge. So you're being challenged to do something that could inevitably be very, very life-threatening. This particular child, you can Google it, it's on BBC News. She had to undergo an emergency operation. She's 6, to get all those magnets out, and it's because she was trying to emulate a TikTok challenge. And so this brings me to this point here, that children today are growing up with technology. I want you to think about the last time you saw a mother breastfeeding, maybe the last 1 or 2 years. They normally breastfeed their children with a phone in front of them. So the children grow knowing a glare of screen, it is coming to their nini even as they're eating. And when they're being weaned out of the breast milk from the mother and they're being given actual food, most of the families nowadays, they are weaning children with TV. So it's either your child is watching Coco Melon, they're either watching Teletubbies, but without a screen on, the child cannot eat. Already we are tuning these children to know that for you to be able to do a certain thing, the screen has to be a motivator. So they are growing with technology. Unlike us, who grew into it. I think for me, I keep telling people that I got my first phone when I was maybe 20. And it was one of those phones that had the snake game. It's the only phone. It had a snake game. It was very basic. Call, text, that's it, right? And as we were growing, then we started getting smartphones, which were very expensive. And then we couldn't afford the internet. So also our limitations of going online were very, very limited. But of course, with time, looking at even right now, you can get a phone worth 3,000 shillings. We have grown into it. So for us, we just keep plugging and playing. But our children, as young as when they're in the stomach, they have a digital footprint. So when they come out, they already are on the internet because their parents have been posting them. They are feeding with technology. They are eating with technology. Then they come into a world where they have to go to school. They have technology. So we work with parents and educators to help them try and set boundaries. For me, that is what is important. Trying to set boundaries and help parents understand technology is wonderful, but we need to use it in the right way so that our families can thrive. Yeah. And so when we are getting into this, one of the most important things is we will learn about online safety. And nobody ever wants to find their child watching like adult content. Nobody ever wants that. But I keep asking parents all the time, and I know you people are here and your parents. Do we watch adult content? Yes, we do watch adult content. Is that adult content in your phone? Absolutely, because people will send that adult content to your phone. It will go into your gallery, and then your child wants to watch Cocomelon on your YouTube. And then when they go into their gallery, what happens? They get to watch what people send you or what you are sending people. Doesn't matter. The content is in your phone. So as a person of authority to that child, you cannot start telling the child you cannot watch adult content, because guess where they engaged adult content? In your phone. All right. So we need to start learning how to have digital use and then self-control and balance. We have to emulate to our children what we want to see in them. And so I teach parents how to value mental health, physical health, and start regulating technology in a healthy way and being intentional. I know we all have all these dreams in our heads, but sometimes you want to, to create this very big house, and you even know where you want to build this house, but you can't wake up and find a house has come down. You have to work towards it. So parenting is the same way. If you want to start seeing how your children are regulating that use of technology properly, you have to be a person who is emulating that. So being intentional, being very cautious, being very intentional, and having a right mindset and a heart set for it. Yeah. And then of course, October not only being a cybersecurity awareness month, just allow me to close this window because it's bringing in some noise. October is not only cybersecurity awareness month, it is also mental health awareness month. And I think right now, if you have been paying attention to what is going on between the COVID period, there's an article that was released by the Wall Street Journal that said that the children who are committing suicide, the teenagers who are committing suicide after spending at least 2 or 3 hours on Instagram, because they go there, they start seeing people living this amazing life, and then when they're looking at themselves, they're not having this amazing life themselves. So they start committing suicide, or they start self-harming, or they start doing very dangerous things. So emotional intelligence and communication is one of the things that I struggle in every class that I teach, because one of the things is we parents do not know how to communicate. Our communication comes with shouting. Our communication comes with withdrawal. And one of the biggest failures that we have is that we don't explain why. So when you want to create a relationship with somebody and you want to start creating healthy boundaries with your children, you always have to begin with the why. So I want us to create this screen time schedule so that you don't get dependent on your screen. I've given you a why. So I want us to be able to pre-screen our content before we consume it, because I do not want you to accidentally watch content that is above your age. This is communication that you can share with a child as young as 5. And as long as you are saying it in a respectful tone and in a way that they understand this is why, they will not have pushback. But imagine you came home and you found your child watching porn and you don't have the shock absorbers, and the first thing you do is grab the phone and you start sending people into their rooms and you're yelling and you have got no clue you're yelling, and you don't want even the children to explain what happened. You're just reacting, and then you decide you guys are not going to have TV for a month. You guys are not going. So you're already giving ultimatums without giving the why. The thing you're doing is that you're pushing your children further away and not knowing that you're not the only person who has access to that child. At the playground, there is a phone. Your nanny has a phone. Their friends outside have phones. Those phones have internet and you have got no control. So when you lack emotional intelligence in how you communicate with your children, instead of bringing them in, you're pushing them further away. So this is something that I help parents all the time to start developing interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills, so that you can build relationships and your children always get to understand that whatever happens, physical or online, I can always go to my parents because my parents have the best interest at heart for me. Whatever it is, they were bullying people, they saw some very horrible content. When they come to you, they know that you will breathe with them and you will work a solution out together. And that is what is a very big challenge for us, because as I said earlier, nobody wants to find their children watching unhealthy things online. Yeah. And then of course we create systems and schedules for discipline, because we cannot have children who have got no discipline. They need to be able to be responsible for their decisions and the consequences of their actions. And then of course create pools of mentorship. And this is what I say, we are throwing out the old and starting with the new. If anybody has seen how angry, and I'm going to use that word very deliberately, I don't know if you've seen how angry we are on Twitter. We are angry Kenyans because we we see certain things, they spark emotions, and without knowing how we are reacting, we start bullying people online. One of the things that when I interact with children, they tell me is that they are our friends online, by the way. Maybe in pseudos, but they follow us online. So it beats the purpose of us telling them, you cannot abuse people online, you cannot be mean online, you cannot disrespect people online. And then they go to your Twitter account and see runs. And I think there is nothing to celebrate about Kenyans being globally recognized as online bullies. There's nothing to celebrate. But you and I are Kenyans, and that title is forever on us. We have a plaque for that already. And so we have to create discipline. And discipline is not only for children. I know our parents disciplined us in a very, what I would call an orthodox way, but that is how they used to discipline us. That is the way they used to know. So we throw out the old and we start with the new. And starting with the new is trying to help children avoid childhood trauma. Because I think we were traumatized when we were growing up, honestly. So we are reacting out of the things that we experienced. And I think you have had in sessions where people say, tulichapwa na tuko tu salama. I mean, so we turned out okay. I don't know what okay means. But we need to start looking at our habits. What are we able to carry from our childhoods that is positive, and what new things can we create? Communicate. One, because when you don't communicate with your children, they look for somebody online to communicate with, and you have got no control what that person will tell your child. And so we need to start replacing negative and unproductive habits. So it starts with you as a parent, because online safety is about you. So when you tell your children, pre-screen your content before you watch it, are you showing them that you can pre-screen your content before you watch it, right? Are you able to create tech-free zones at home and stick to them? I'll give an example. We tell our children, you're using your phone for too long, and we are always stuck to our phones. In fact, sometimes we work with our phones stuck into the charger. Yeah. So what are we trying to tell our children? That I have got no control over how I spend time on my phones or on my gadgets. Whereas I want them to manage their screen time. They will see and they will do what they see. Another thing is, like, again, creating tech-free zones. We tell our children, you cannot go with your phones everywhere, but you and I, we know that we go with our phones to the toilet, and then we end up staying unnecessarily long in the toilet, right? So we have to create new habits, productive habits, and be consistent with them, because if you want our children to follow what we are doing, we have to model that behavior. So discipline is also another big thing. And of course, I keep saying, if you feel like you're not adequately equipped to mentor children or to go into deeper spaces of online safety with them, then you can outsource that habit. You can outsource that skill. However, some of the things that we need to do, we need to practice them ourselves at home. And then there's this topic that I really love teaching about family blueprints, and it's a very specific tech vision board. And this is what I say. We probably have been in a business somewhere or in an office somewhere where there's a vision board, and you already know what you're supposed to achieve this year, and you know what you're supposed to achieve next year, and when things change, you know how to manipulate that vision board for our businesses. But do you know that you can create your own vision board at home? And this is how you do it. Think about your children. Say you have 3 children. One is, let me say you have a teenager, you have a pre-teenager, and you have a very young child. How do you look at them this year in terms of how they're using tech? And think about the COVID season, because most of us gave our children, even younger, gadgets before we thought we would. But fortunately or unfortunately, they have gadgets. So how are they using that gadget between 1 year? What are you anticipating the growth will be within 2 years? And we can do that for 5 years, and then we can do that for 10 years. And one of the things that I do when I'm teaching this particular vision board is to try and see your own personal participation when it comes to your children growing. I'll give you examples of, at the current moment, we have a social media entry for children at the age of 13. And we know in Kenya, and a 13-year-old is a child. But at 13 years, a child is actually able to have a social media account. So if your child is 9, why are you waiting until they're 13 for you to start discussing online etiquette or social media safety? Why are you waiting? Because when they're playing games, they're already getting into that space. When they're hanging out with their friends and they have bigger friends or older siblings, they're already interacting with social media in one way or another. So why do you want to wait? So when you're creating this blueprint, it's for you to be able to understand there are certain conversations I need to have with child A about this, child B about this, and this one who is young, this is how I'm going to start introducing them to technology. And remember the previous slide where I said mentorship. You can create mentorship within your own children. Children learn very well among themselves. So if you manage to make sure that your older children are displaying a good level of responsibility and digital wellness, you're able to push that down to your younger children. So you're creating mentorship already within your own house. So I help parents understand how value systems influence digital environments, but also help you understand that you cannot fight technology. You have to embrace it. I'm going to give you a very straight example because we are in Kenya and we are currently working on the digital blueprint, right? We are in the digital economy and the blueprint for the digital economy is already out. So if you're a parent here today and you're wondering, what will my child be? They don't necessarily need to be a doctor, by the way. They might want to be a doctor. They don't necessarily need to be a doctor, but they can become an engineer in field of medicine. So they can become a robotics engineer in the field of medicine. If they want to be pilots, have you thought about drone technology? Because those are the things that our children will start engaging in. And as we are wondering, what are our children doing online? How about we change our mindsets and start helping them think about their future? So another assignment that I'm giving you, read the digital economy. Then ask yourself, what skills do my children need to have so that they can plug and play? Right now in schools, people are using technology already in school, and this was forced on us due to COVID. But the fact that it was forced on us doesn't mean that at some point, if we're going to manage COVID, that technology will go out. Schools are going to continue innovating in technology. So we need to start asking ourselves, how can I be part of this? I don't need to understand how how AI is working or virtual reality or augmented reality for my children, but I need to be able to support. I need to create a conducive environment for my children to plug and play into this. So this is part of the family vision. And when we are creating this, we are always talking about safety. How can we keep the children safe so that we are exposing them, but we have in mind, according to different ages, these are the conversations we need to have with them. And of course, look at all these opportunities. Our children are now global citizens. We are also global citizens by mere fact that we are online. But for them, their livelihoods are domiciled online. They really have less physical friends unless they're in school. They have more online friends. So they play online. Why can't we use gaming as a tool of education? Why can't we use social media as a tool of education? It really doesn't need to be the classroom education. Let them learn different things. Like we had STEM, which was science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but they added, now it is called STEAM because they added art. Because our children also have to start learning how to express themselves through art. So these are the kind of things that I want to challenge you so that you don't feel like, oh, my child is spending so much time online. What the hell are they doing? They can code, they can learn new things, they can engage with people, they can communicate, they can create their own small videos. And as they're doing that, you're always having conversations with them about privacy, because some of the things that I encourage parents to tell children is that you cannot post where we live, you cannot post where we go to school, you cannot post phone numbers, email addresses, and stuff like that when you're online. When you're out there and you're doing live videos, please post those photos after you're out of that place because it can be a security risk. So you're having these kind of conversations with them, but also allowing them to explore the internet. So this is what I say, the good things in life are enjoyed in moderation. Technology is one of those things. When technology is used mindfully and in moderation, it enriches our lives. But when it is used compulsively without guidelines, boundaries, and controls, it degrades our lives and robs us of human connection. And if you remember that first image where you saw a phone was literally, robbing people of human connection, if that is something that you relate with, start trying to use your gadgets and technology in moderation so that that doesn't become an eventuality in your home. Again, I think because we have children who cram physics and chemistry and all these wonderful things, these two things are things that they need to be able to know. That if they have access to a phone, they can download the National Keysight App and use it to report when they have seen abusive content, when they're being bullied online, when there's fraud happening online. There is a specific aspect of child online abuse that is there, and then they can use this app as anonymous if they don't feel safe putting their names there, or they can still post their names. This is a free app. As much as they're downloading the TikToks and the Snapchats, this is an app that children need to have on their phones. Again, we have Childline Kenya that have a toll-free number that children can call. So today you can go write 116, stick it with a magnet on your fridge, because everybody normally goes and opens the fridge, or behind the toilet, because we all use the toilet at least once a day, or maybe more than once a day. So put it in a space where you know your children visit every single day, behind the fridge or behind the toilet, so that when they are going online and you're not near them and they feel insecure, they feel uncomfortable, they don't feel safe, they can call 116 or they can go to the app and report an incident. You are empowering your children so that they can start taking these matters into their hands, so that they don't wait, or we don't start finding cases have gone way too far before an adult actually intervened. So you can actually, I'll leave this page here because I think my presentation is done. Yes. I'll go back to that page. So those are two things that you actually need to be able to empower your children with. And then, of course, keeping families safe online is one of the things that we are passionate about. We teach digital literacy, and our parenting program is just about that, helping you to create a conducive environment. You don't need to be a techie. You don't need to know what DDoS is. And I know now you're asking me what DDoS is. You don't need to know what a deep dive is for you to keep your children safe online. All you need to have is a change of mindset, a change of heart set, and you need to start making your home conducive. And conducive meaning your children can come to you. They can come and say, I'm not sure. And even if you as a parent you're not sure, that's why there's a community for you to ask. So ask experts, ask other parents, how am I able to navigate this space, because I really am not sure what to do. Before you put boundaries, or before you start installing softwares in your children's phones so that they don't access certain sites, please have a conversation with them. My 10-year-old the other day told me, it's okay, I know how to remove them. He's 10. Yes, he can remove them. So as opposed to you forcing things into their machines, have a conversation. Of course, let them understand why it is important to put softwares, because of they don't understand malware and viruses. They only think that it is offensive for you to block them from watching what they want. Have a conversation before you put those things, because if they don't buy into what you're doing, remember, you're not the only person who has access to them. They will go and get that information out there, or they'll be like my child. They start learning how to remove software. So I am going to leave this here so that at least maybe if you are writing, you can write. I'll hand my session back to Harriet, I think, so that if there are any questions at this point, I will be ready to answer. Harriet?
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for that. Do we say mind-opening, especially for the participants? That was powerful, and I believe that was meant for all of us here, young and old and oldest. Thank you so much for that presentation. Participants, now I want to open the stage for Q&A. If we have any questions, we can either unmute and speak or put them on the chat. Anything that has come up, we can put it in the chat so that we can now discuss.
I can see somebody said the first image is indeed bondage. Yes, the one that people were, there's somebody who was handcuffed. I think that one actually directly talks to us as adults, that is actually indeed bondage. Yeah, yeah. If there are no questions, and I think probably because we need to give time to the two other speakers who are coming, if you think about a question, you can post it on the chat, and then probably we'll answer it after the other two speakers have gone through the. Oh, I can see John has put his hand up. John, please go ahead.
Yes, are you getting me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to ask something. Okay, normally technology has become a broad kind of in a scenario in the current on the current generation. Like everybody has access to technology. Now, my question is, like for the children, is it necessary, like assuming, okay, I have children at my house, and like I want to play some movie to these children. Is it necessary for me to check over the content of the movie before I play this movie to the children? Because there are some movies which like they have some contents, there are some parts in the movie which is not advisable for a kid to watch. That's why you see in every movie, like they put P13, P14, like this, something parental guide has to be there. So where is necessary? Is it necessary to do that every time? That's my question.
Okay, thank you for that amazing question. I want to answer it with a demonstration. So unless there is another question, Harriet, is there another hand as I'm doing my demonstration? I want to demonstrate to John what to do. Is there another hand or another question?
No, I cannot see another hand, but I'll be having a question after that.
Okay, please go ahead. You have a question yourself?
Yes, I just, just some observation.
Yes.
Truth be told is that technology is being introduced to our children at a very, very, very tender age. As you just presented, that it's even from the breastfeeding age, they already are getting introduced to technology. Now, my question is at what, because communication is very, very important. And sometimes you see children as young as 1 year, 1 or less than, they already are interacting with technology. And you start asking, at what point do we start communicating and educating these children in a way that they can be able to understand the pros and cons of technology? Because as you say, they are observing what we are seeing, they're observing what we are doing, and they're actually copying 100%. So age for me, I'm like, at what time, at what point? And then another thing is, as much as we are, my second concern or observation is, or maybe a question is, we are thinking of protecting the children. Do we also need to think about protecting the adults? Maybe majority of them are so ignorant about what they are doing in the presence of these children that they do not understand the effect. Do we also need to run this concurrently? As we protect the children, we also protect the adults, because technology has taken us, in a wave. Both they are educated. Actually, I think the biggest percentage is the naive percentage of people who don't understand. And all this is coming to them, like a flood. How do we also work in a way that both are also protected? Yeah? We protect the children and we also protect the adults.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I think I will want to answer that in a way that I will not offend anybody. But let me just answer John. John, there is a site in front of you that I personally use.
Okay, I can see.
Yes, I use it for pre-screening content.
Okay.
And what I have done, it's called Common Sense Media. It's an NGO. It's an org. commonsensemedia.org. Okay. I have actually, you can see here, logged in as a parent. So I'm able to get access to the screen. So this is what happens on this site. I have helped my children learn how to use this particular website for two purposes. We use it to pre-screen family, like when you're having a family movie, so that we make sure that the youngest person who is 7 years old in my household is able to watch a movie with all of us. Yeah. That is a disadvantage to my husband and I and my son who is 10, because we always have to watch a movie that is below our age, which is okay, because we have to consider the person who is youngest in the family as long as we are watching a family movie. And the other reason why I have taught my children how to watch this is when I am not around, they're able to tell themselves, I am comfortable watching this, because we have had conversations about our values, the things that are acceptable, and we have put boundaries on the things that are not acceptable. So Common Sense Media has different varieties. It has movies and TV. So here you can actually go and there's a new movie that you've had your children want to watch, and you can come here and pre-screen. So I'll give you an example of something that is in the big screen right now. This one, No Time to Die. It's a James Bond, and you can already see here. I'm sorry, I think. Let me see what I can do here. You can see. You'd have to log in, because I think I've used my account very many times. So you'd have to log in and see. Already when you get here, you see this movie is recommended for children 14 years and above. So if your child is already not of that age, this is a point to start having conversations with them. But the good thing about this particular site is that it will not only give you the age, it will give you violent content. If this particular, whatever movie they're watching has violent content, if it has sexual content, if it has vulgarity, that is bad language, if it has alcohol and drugs, that is in part of that movie. So if you see those elements, and if it has positive elements, of course, and if it has consumerism, because also part of online safety is us trying to teach our children how not to get trapped into consumerism, especially in gaming. So when you have conversations around, okay, you wanted to watch this show, but can you see it has violence, it has sexual content, it has bad language, it is not of your age, you're giving them the why they cannot watch, and they can actually see. But then you're not telling them no, you're telling them you have to be a certain age for you to be able to understand what this movie is communicating. So you're not ideally telling your children not no, you're telling them not now. Because if they're 10, they'll still be 14 and this movie will be online. So it has movies, it has books, and it has apps and games. In fact, this is the place we spend a lot of time, the apps and games. And when I was asking you, do you know which apps your children are watching and do you know which content they're consuming? When they tell you something like TikTok or Discord, because I know very many parents also get confused. I don't know, my child said they're on Discord. What is Discord? They're gamers. Discord is for gamers. You can come on this site and Google Discord, pre-screen it. If you feel like, I'm not very sure this is the right place for you to be, why can't you have a conversation with them around it? It also has the best game list for children. If you have any children with special needs and you want them to engage technology, this site is also amazing because it has apps for special needs children. So it is a place where you can learn a lot. You can also get to hear what parents are saying about certain movies versus what the site is saying, and you can make informed decisions out of that. So John, utilize commonsensemedia.org. It will help you a lot. And also, not only consume it, teach your children how to use it. So when you're not available, they can use it by themselves. Yeah. So I hope
Wow.
that answers your question and it also helps everybody
Wow.
else.
Thank you. Thank you very
Karibu
much.
sana. Karibu.
Thank
So
you.
Harriet, adults, I keep saying it's not an excuse for you to say you did not know. So if you're online and you've gone online as an adult, you should make it your duty, your everyday mandate to know what is happening online. The same way we utilize Twitter, for instance. I personally don't watch news on the TV, but if I want to know what's happening, I will go on Twitter and select what news to consume. Because we learn such kind of things on the go, that is not an excuse to say we are naive or we don't know what is happening. It is your responsibility. And I think because we engage technology every other day, we need to be able to pick the things that we feel can affect us and learn how to manage that. For people who have very young children, and maybe you're concerned that my child is too young, imagine when your child is teething, they're still very young, but when they're putting dirty things in their mouth, you still find a way to correct them not to put dirty things in their mouth because you know the consequences of them putting dirty things in their mouth. Somehow there's communication that happens when you're telling them that is not right, or you're giving them something better to put in their mouth. That is communication. So when it comes to technology, and especially with these younger ones, they start creating habits from what we engage them in. So if you're going to engage your children in block playing and stuff like that, they don't know what technology is because they're not engaging with it. But if you're always on your phone because you're thinking, oh, my child is too young, or this and that, you're the one who's creating that bad habit for them, and it will be very hard for you to withdraw it when they become dependent on that particular. I hope that helps you, Harriet. It is your behavior that helps them, not the other way around. Yeah. But there is no excuse for parents to say, I didn't know. You need to learn from other people. I keep saying wisdom is learning from your experience. But by the way, for me, wisdom is learning from other people's experience, because I don't need to put my hand on fire to know that fire burns. If I see somebody burning, I will know not to put my hand there. So I will equip myself not to have to get into that fire. So Asante Sana, probably because my time is up, let's give it to the next speaker.
That's amazing, timely, powerful, Evelyn, for that. Thank you so much. I can see from from the chat and the comments, that was a great presentation. It was a powerful session, and people have been able to learn a lot. Thank you so much. for your time and for that great presentation. I think now we come to the end of that particular session, and I will be handing it over to who? Onsomo Clive. Onsomo Clive, I will put this session, I will hand it over to you so that you can introduce the next presenter or the next speaker. Onsomo Clive, can you hear me?
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Evelyn, for the very informative presentation. I've learned a lot. And I was just reflecting on it and realizing that whatever you are talking about applies to the current parents, applies to the those who are in university now and have younger siblings, and the future, because we are looking at the information age is here. The explosion of information is with us, and we have to find a way to control it. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot. Allow me to present to introduce the next presenter. Our next presenter makes me want to hide my CV. His name is Tyrus Muya Kamau. He is an information security professional with 13 years experience in the field. He's a principal consultant at Euclid Consultancy Limited, a cybersecurity company which he started in about 3 years ago, where he runs it full time. He specializes on signaling security, penetration testing and research, and development in cybersecurity, training and awareness and compliance. Prior to this forming of his own company, Tyrus held various leadership positions in the industry, including being Africa head of IT security, Airtel Money at Bharti, Airtel, and group head of IT security at Cellulant Group. He was a key consultant in the development of the National Cybersecurity Master Plan, working with Booz Allen and Hamilton and the former ICT board. His input saw him work with various intergovernmental bodies in line with the country's vision. Hello? Did I hear an interruption, please? Are you hearing me, ladies and gentlemen?
We can hear you, go ahead.
Thank you. His input saw him work with various intergovernmental bodies in line with the country's Vision 2030. The Master Plan was launched by His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta in February 2014. Tyrus was also a part-time lecturer at Strathmore University's iLab for 3 years, where he was instructing masters in telecommunications, innovation and development. In addition, he also conducts hands-on training on cybersecurity under his firm, usually with the MLab and iHub. Tyrus was also involved in a training organized by Interpol on prosecuting cybercrimes, as well as ISOC's training. I don't know if most of you have even really found out what ISOC. ISOC is the Internet Society, which was involved in training on cybersecurity and internet freedom. He has also contributed significantly to matters cybersecurity in the form of articles, publications, and cybersecurity reports. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Tyrus. He's going to take us through mobile fraud. You've seen a lot of an increase in fraud, and we want to really interact. I know that is a lot of interest for the cybersecurity practitioners. Tyrus, welcome.
Thank you very much, Clive, and also Harriet and the KCSFA organizing committee for making me be part of this panel. I'm pleased to be here and to also listen in on presentations by the other presenters. So great job again. And so I will just dive straight into my presentation. Let me just share my screen. Okay, we can all see that.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Just a minute. Okay. All right, great. So as indicated, I will be talking on mobile fraud. Mobile fraud is quite wide. So right from impersonation to financial fraud, to social engineering and what have you. But on this particular presentation, I'd like to focus on financial fraud, which is an area that I've worked on for a couple of years in different capacities, as Clive has intimated. And hopefully that out of the 66 participants we have here, you have not been part of this statistic. And if you have, then I think this particular talk will shed some light as to how that mobile fraud happens. So I'll give you a bit of a background, and I'll use a case study of a specific incident that I worked on among one of the incidences that I've worked on with several banks and financial organizations, as well as mobile money operators. So this particular case happened in 2015, and as per my NDA, it has lapsed. I will share the details of the case, but I will not mention the client for obvious reasons. So part of the presentation is redacted. So the areas that you see are things that will guide you and will give you an idea of exactly how this happens. So I think we'll just skip this slide. That was the introduction. So when we look at the history of and the evolution of financial fraud, we realize that fraud has rooted itself in a society from back in the day. You remember at times you'd walk into town and there were these guys called patapotea. So they had cards and they'd rotate cards and ask you to guess what it is that the next card is and everything. Eventually that evolved into something else that involved, meeting someone in town and they tell you that they have this charity sweepstakes card. For those of you who are old enough to remember charity sweepstakes, and they claim that they have won. And that they need you to accompany them to the office because they're new in Nairobi, and once you accompany them, then they drop from you. Then the advent of technology came in, and when we started having mobile banking, actually it started as SMS banking back in 2009, I remember, with Standard Chartered Bank being one of the first banks to offer SMS banking. And so everything was pretty much not encrypted. It was in clear text. We hadn't quite understood the technology as it were back then, and I was fortunate enough to have working for a company known as Cellulant that was rolling out these products. And the fraud wasn't as pronounced because for me, the way I see it with security is that everyone is always trying to play catch up. So before they figure out the technology, the fraud cases are a bit on the low, but then eventually they will start figuring out how it is that they can actually beat the system. So then we went to USSD, then we came to mobile apps. Almost every other bank, SACCO, or financial organization has an app. And as you can see from news articles, this is just a snippet. We're seeing rising cases of SIM swap fraud, which I'll explain what that is. You see new banking hall, you see phone scams, you find there are people calling you purporting to be from a certain bank, and they'll walk you through a process where they'll take your PIN number. And it's funny because I'm giving this presentation when an hour ago, I just seen an article on Twitter by The Nation, by NTV, that Safaricom has fired 28 of its employees over fraud. So you can see it's a very live topic as we speak. So this started becoming an issue because on one hand, regulation wasn't quite sure where does the policy lie with. So does it lie with the CA, Communications Authority, or does it lie with CBK because of the financial aspect? But in between this ping pong, you remember, and there was an issue back in when M-Pesa was introduced to the market, I think 2008. So CA felt that they were probably the ones to govern, that process because they own what is going on the gadget and the spectrum that the gadget is using. But then on the other hand, they don't have any visibility as to what, financial guidelines and AML and KYC processes need to be rolled out. And that's where now CBK comes in. And so after a whole back and forth, I think they came up with what is known as the prudential guidelines to try and govern how it is that mobile money runs in this country. So as you can see, we always have these cases, and not to mention even the famous committee people who have defrauded people for quite a long time. And there's one thing I always say about financial fraud. So you can be compliant with what the regulator says, but that does not equate to being secure. And I repeat, you can be compliant, but you're not secure. So being compliant simply means that I've taken the prudential guidelines from CBK. I've gone through it, every single checklist of them. When the auditors come, I present my checklist and they confirm against it. But the converse is that what you don't realize is that fraudsters and hackers don't work that way. They don't sit in boardrooms and discuss how it is that we're going to break into this bank. These guys are relentless. They just keep pushing until something gives in, and they only have to get it right once, right? And so for most organizations, I always tell them that it's okay to be compliant so that you don't lose your license, but you lose your license if one of your clients loses a lot of money. And if you're not insured, if you're not insured, you don't have what is known as a there's a name for it. There's a specific name for it. If you don't have that particular insurance covering the transactions that the client is transacting, then definitely you're going to lose your license. So it's okay to have a blend of both, but you can't just have compliance as one thing, thinking that it covers your security needs. So what happens? So fine, you're compliant, you've gotten all the licenses, and the regulator is happy, the board is happy, the CEO is happy, the GMs are happy. And then one day you get a call and they tell you that we've lost about 70 million Kenya shillings through mobile banking. It's in the dead of the night. Where do you start from? How do you convince the board that this particular compliance model that you adopted, this particular audit that was done by one of the audit firms, and this particular letter that was endorsed by the regulator could have prevented this particular fraud from happening? So that's when you actually come into terms with the reality that hackers are people who, or even fraudsters, let me call them that, are people who know no bounds. They just keep pushing the wall until something gives. And so let me get into my case study. So on this particular incident, so the client reached out and they reported a fraud incident worth 7 million USD. That's around about 80 million Kenya shillings. And this happened in a span of a weekend. It was a long weekend. And the funny thing is that most of these frauds actually happen over long weekends because they know that most organizations have skeleton staff. And now it's even worse because of the work from home policy, because of COVID. And so I was called in, and before we could discuss anything, of course, you have to put NDAs into place. Sorry, was there a question? Hello. Is there a question? Or I can proceed.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, mute yourselves. Mute yourselves, please. Sandra, Lucy. Sandra, Lucy. Harriet, you can mute that participant.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Sorry about that. So, so a day after, I went in with a team of mine, and we requested for all logs, right from the biometric logs, CCTV footage, and the goal was to perform what is called dimensional modeling. Now, here's why this is important. Every time a fraud occurs, most people focus their attention on the system, forgetting that this fraud did not occur in isolation. It just didn't occur on the core banking system or the mobile banking system. That fraud occurred within an organization that has people. Yeah. And so that's why for me, this is something that I always preach to most of my clients. It's called dimensional modeling. So you need to tie each and every aspect of the organization, each and every aspect of the offices, to the roles, to the people, because that way you get a bigger picture of what you're looking at. And so after it took a while because some of these logs were rotated. They didn't have backup logs for the biometrics. Some of the CCTV footage as well was rotated. And so we just decided to work with what it is that we had. And so after combing through all that and multiple visits to the scene, we're able to identify the system owners, their names, their phone numbers, and possible associations. Now remember, 80% of the fraud that occurs is perpetrated, or rather, sorry, so 80% of the time fraud occurs, it's done by people from the inside. It's very difficult to get someone who's just seated somewhere alone in a basement with a hoodie on, trying to hack a bank. It is extremely difficult. That would have happened maybe in the early 90s or late 90s. But nowadays, the way the systems are set up, and even the perimeter defenses that are there and the amount of monitoring that is going on, you need at least to have an insider to assist you in perpetrating the fraud. So once we're able to identify, so we got their phone numbers, we got their names. So these are part of a redacted report. So these were I'd say the top 20 suspects that we figured out would have been part of that fraud. And so you can even see there's a guy from information security at the bottom. You have the core banking server admin, the database admin as well. There's also a team lead, and then we have a few guys from business. So you can see alternatives business channel. You can also see there's a head of IT as well. And so we started narrowing down to these people. So what we did is that we requested for their machines because they luckily were using Active Directory. So all the machines were logged into the system. So it was just a question of looking at the owner of the system, or rather the owner of the laptop or the PC, and tracking where they logged in and when they logged in, plus an additional plethora of other logs that we had requested for. So then we also got the biometric log just to see who checked in at what time. So we compared when was this machine used and where was this person. Had they clocked in? Had they clocked out? Because it's one thing to have someone clock in at 8, and you can see they're still using the machine at around 5, but they never clocked out. So that tries to paint us a picture of exactly where they were. Okay, and this was very important because that's why I said you always need to tie your people to specific things, because systems don't just work in isolations. They're manned by people, and those people have jurisdiction within the organization. And at the same time, I was also very keen to understand, could it be a case of someone who authorized access from the inside and give access to someone from the outside? Because normally that's how they commit fraud in banks. So someone will will install TeamViewer and have a session running, but then the fraud would be committed by someone who's probably not even in the country. And so for me, that was the direction I was taking, because there's another case that I handled, which I'll give you a brief about, where there was money being siphoned from the mobile banking system. And it's not actual money, it's just a question of checks and balances, so credit and debit. So they created what is called float. We all understand what float is. So they created money in the system, in the database, but then at the point of cashing out is where now it translates to actual cash. So they do it at ATMs, they either do it at agents, they either do it at where else? So they can even send peer-to-peer, and that person, just to try and hide their traces. So that particular incident gave me an insight as to how we can probably perform a very thorough and in-depth investigation for this. So beyond the people, we looked at what was happening in the system logs that we got. So one thing that stood out was that there was poor handling of sensitive data that led to compromise. Then number 2, system access was not role-based. So some of these things look obvious, that you should have a role-based system whereby you have your super admin, you have your admins, and then you have your operators or users with different levels of access. But at the same time, at the very beginning of how they developed this system, because this particular fraud was perpetrated through a mobile banking application, a mobile app. So you could see it was logging using a default password, a very simple password actually. And number 2, this password was actually being logged in the web server log, which is something that shouldn't happen, because if someone is smart enough, they would know that they just go and check what is running in the logs, harvest that, use it to log into the database, and there you have it. They're there creating e-value, as we call it, and all that remains now is to cash it out. So we needed to go further beyond that. So what we have now, so we have the system players. We understand who was where at what point through the biometrics. Then you've looked at the system and you've seen that there are specific logs that were leaking out data. So what we did is that I had a colleague who used to work at the cybercrime unit. And so I talked to him and I requested if he can generate for me M-Pesa statements for the particular individuals that we were suspecting were at the office on that particular day or had clocked in but not checked out. And number three, those who were out of town at the day of the incident. So of course he had because I mean he's law enforcement, so he got an affidavit to pull these records for us. And we were able to nail down that there were about 4 individuals who all traveled to Kisii at the same time when the fraud, just before the fraud happened. So a day before, that was on a Friday. And their M-Pesa statements, their individual M-Pesa statements indicated that they had run lots of transactions within that day. And they had cashed out from a specific M-Pesa agent in Kisii town at a house called Chogo House in Kisii. And so we really needed to tie this together so that we understand. So this particular individual had his laptop logged in. He was in the office. He clocked in or did clock out. We can tell that they belong to this particular department and they were working in cahoots with these particular individuals. They traveled, they cashed out this money. So what next? Where do we take it from there? Is that sufficient for us to build a case strong enough to hand over to their legal team for prosecution? And so what we did is that we went back to the management and we just tabled the entire evidence to them. And the funny thing is that they actually confirmed something that they had been suspecting, because the guys who we suspected, the guys who had traveled to Kisii, had all refused to take leave for a year. And within that year, that was a period they were deploying this mobile banking application, right? And so they decided to just lose their leave days. Not that they were working any harder than anyone else, or they were committed to the project better than anyone else, but they were planning on how to defraud the bank of this specific amount. And that amount was actually coming from corporate accounts, because corporate accounts had been given their own individual mobile banking system. So we're talking of people like KRA, we're talking of people like NHIF, NSSF, who used to bank with this particular client. And so when HR mentioned that, it dawned on me that it is very critical, like I mentioned, fraud does not just happen. There are certain patterns that take place that you may not see at that particular point. But if you dig deeper and you do what is called dimensional modeling, then you'll be able to pick up traces. And it's always, intelligence is always about a piece of information. You just need one piece of information that will help you solve that puzzle, or add to that puzzle, and you'll be getting closer to solving that particular incident. So we handed the case to them. Fortunately, they were prosecuted. They were arraigned in court. The case was heard, but there was a challenge when they were presented in court, because I was called in to be an expert witness to try and interpret the evidence that we had collected. And remember, this was way before the Evidence Act was, the Data Protection Act was put into place, outlining how evidence is collected, and even the Cybercrime Bill. This was way before then. So there was no way of proving that we didn't tamper with this evidence. How did we collect and contain this evidence? Did we tag it? Was it cataloged? And if it was, under what provision in the law is it supported? You get. So most of the evidence was it's akin to, in the US, they have something called the RICO Act. So the RICO Act, RICCO, means that the federal government can perform wiretaps on you if they suspect you're either running a drug ring, you're either selling human trafficking, or you're selling weapons. They can collect evidence on you. And they know very well that evidence was not collected in the right manner. There was no court order to collect that evidence. But if they strongly feel that they have a case and that they can tie this evidence back to you, they'll go to a judge and enforce the RICO Act. So the RICO Act means, so they'll come to Tyrus and say, we have evidence of you talking to these people. We saw you with a shipment of guns and cocaine and whatever. So the judge has given us permission to call you to court to come and present yourself and prove your innocence. So it's up to you to disapprove the evidence that you collected. So that's the good thing about that particular law, because it allows you now to seal such gaps in the absence of an act or a bill that is backed up by law. So these guys were slapped with fines of about, I think, 20 million each. And against how much money that they had defrauded, you know, it almost looks like a slap in the wrist. And that was the same case with another case that I was handling where the client had lost about 240 million Kenya shillings. And the guy was let off on a bond of about 20 million, you get. And so it's a challenge that we faced in that particular fraud case. And that's why I think immediately after the Data Privacy Act was enforced, now is when we're seeing people being prosecuted. So if you send M-Pesa to a wrong number and they withdraw or they fail to reverse, then there's a law that will catch up with that person and they'll be put in. And I think we've seen such precedences happen within the last 1 year. So that law would have been very helpful in trying to tackle some of these challenges. And that's why I even put it there that I have proposed amendments underway. So that's exactly why we came up with the Data Privacy Act. And also the investigative capacity needs to be ramped up, including incidents handling. And this is where organizations are always shy from hiring incidents responders or even outsourcing that particular function, because it's always the first 24 hours. Just like when someone disappears, the first 48 hours are the most crucial. If you can't find that person within 48 hours, then that's even the cops tell you that, yeah, you need to now file a report. And then we can take it up from there. So with fraud, it's always within the first 2 hours of what happens. So if you've lost money within the first 2 hours, 2 to 6 hours, containment, you know. So do not unplug the server, just take a screenshot or take a snapshot. If it's a virtual environment, take that snapshot, put it aside, collect all the logs, don't let them rotate, and start having people looking at them, because then you can also try and reduce the amount of loss and maybe try and recover as much as you can from the loss that has already left the system. Then tighter monetary policies, AML. So I think this is being enforced currently because I think even at this point, the CBK regulation of not having, where you can't withdraw more than $1 million without explaining what the money is about, hadn't come into place. So people would either go and withdraw crazy amounts of money and no one would ask any questions. But I see now we are moving towards a phase where laws are getting tighter and people are getting sensitized, at least from a corporate level. Then on the other hand, we are seeing a lot of user education. I think most of you receive SMSs from your banks telling you not to share your PIN. Mobile operators will tell you we'll only call you from this number. Do not accept calls that don't come from this number. We'll never ask you for your PIN. So there's a lot of public awareness that is going on. But at the same time, I think a lot needs to be done, because we are repeatedly seeing cases of people being defrauded their money and not having a chance to recover it. And again, the other thing that I think we also can look at is internally within organizations, they try and always, abstain from accepting liability. So you'll find that someone has lost money through fraud, and they'll ask you, so who do you share your phone with, or who knows that you bank with this bank? So in a bid to just try and not compensate the client or the customer. So I think with people like COFEC and other unions and maybe Kenya bankers, they probably just need to come and, in as much as they're protecting the interest of the banks, there needs to be a consumer body that also looks into the consumer side of things, and perhaps even takes up cases on pro bono basis, just to try and whip some of these institutions into place, because people have lost money that worked very hard for, and nothing ever happens, and they always get blamed. So that was my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them now.
Very, very informative presentation. I've learned a lot, and I'm just having two questions here. One, the issue of mobile applications, the way they tie the bank account to the mobile app. Some have not been tested properly. And then you find, like I know for sure, there's a bank that has already told they're advising customers to disable the app. Yet they have told the customers to install the app because they are getting information from the bank indicating that there's an OTP they want, the fraudsters are sharing, and they're asking them to share the OTP so that they can defraud them. So what do we do when we find the landscape of the mobile apps have not been properly tested, and especially for security? The second part is the insider. When you look at the issue of how we collect evidence and the Evidence Act, the law, there's the law of evidence and the Criminal Procedure Code. Assume you have been called in to do an investigation, an administrative investigation or a corporate investigation. Then suddenly it turns out that it's a fraud, and that means you might need to call DCI. So that means the way you handled the evidence was a little different, the way you looked at the case. By the time you are coming and realizing the fraud is heavy, where do you go from there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clive. I think I'll answer your two questions, and then if someone else has a question, maybe you can just put it on the chat, or you can ask after I respond to Clive. So on mobile app security, you're very right. And one of the challenges that I've faced across my career is that most organizations develop the apps to catch up with the competition, not because they're keen on having a secure app. It's always that, oh, Bank A has done this, we need to do better. Bank B is doing this, we need to catch up with them. And then security is never part of the development process, unfortunately. And for most organizations that I've seen, they rarely do secure development. It's always an afterthought, and especially when the fraud has happened. Now, the case in point where fraudsters are able to call customers and ask them to share an OTP, these are no random fraudsters. These are people who know exactly how that app is working, and they could be either from the company that was contracted to develop the mobile app, because hardly do organizations and especially banks have capacity to develop apps internally. There are very few of them. Number two, the collision between the contractors and the bankers. Now the guys who handle the back end, the core banking and all the back office stuff, and now the guys who present the front end, that is the now the developers. So that is always about collision, and I can almost say without a fear of contradiction that 99% of all the frauds that happen where the fraudster is calling and asking you to share an OTP, then they know exactly how that app works. There was a case in point before they came up with the official app. There was a bank, quite a huge bank locally, that was in the process of developing the first mobile banking app, but then someone got wind of it. So you know what he did? He developed an app that harvests people's data and put it on Play Store. And people from that bank started downloading and sharing their account numbers and PINs. So by the time they were realizing how far it had gone, it was too late. So they had to write to Google and have the app pulled down. They had to call their customers to come and change their PINs and block their transactions. And you see now they will block en masse, which means now it even becomes an inconvenience to a legitimate customer who had not even downloaded the app. So there's a lot of sensitization that needs to go into, asking and even informing corporates and companies that are developing or going the mobile app, so that they need to really look at this security thing from a huger lens and from a wider perspective. On your second question, investigation. So called in, do my investigation, collect my evidence, involve DCI, and then realize that this case is bigger than it should be. Then for me, it's always about involving the investigating body or the law enforcement body. And for me here, it's always DCI because they have a serious crimes and cybercrime division that deals with this. And so over time, I've developed rapport with them. And even at times when I feel I need a bit more information to help me understand this, I'll probably go to them and see if we can crack the case open. But this is always in knowledge with the client. So I always tell them, this is above my pay grade now. I need to involve law enforcement. And the good thing is that, there are always NDAs that are signed with them. So we'll probably go to DCI, come up with a plan. They'll help us with this bit of the investigation. And then within the confines of the law, present the evidence. And then now the legal team from the organization can take it up. And they can always have someone from DCI come and testify if need be.
Thank you. There are questions on the chat. I don't know if I should read them for you.
Okay, kindly.
There's one saying, I have a question on third-party vendors and fraud. I don't know what the question is. But there's a
Mr. Clive, before you proceed, may I just ask one question which is related to the answer he just gave?
Okay.
So, hi Tyrus.
Hi.
Your presentation, first of all.
Thank you.
What I wanted to ask was, one of my friends got a call like that, but he was not asked for any OTP or any PIN or anything like that, but still hundreds of thousands, like I can't remember exactly, but around 400, 500K was transferred from his. So might you have an insight on how they could have managed to do that without getting any sort of password or PIN or OTP?
Yes, in fact, let me just take you back to this particular slide. So you see this here, SIM swap?
Yes.
So this particular fraud is very, and now is when mobile networks are trying to stem it. So nowadays you can verify how many numbers are registered to your ID across all networks. So before, what they do, they'd not even call you to ask you to give them your PIN. They probably say they're calling from Safaricom, they're calling from Airtel, they're calling from Telcom. There's a problem with your line. We need you to switch it off for 10 seconds, then switch it back on. Since they already have your details, they already have your PIN, and this fraud was mostly perpetrated by people working in banks and mobile money systems like M-Pesa and Airtel Money.
Okay.
So because they have APIs that interface, and the problem with this is that I remember, I'm not quite sure because the last time I worked in a telco was a few years ago, but the interface that connects the mobile money platform with the bank is unencrypted.
Mm-hmm.
It is not encrypted because it's a flaw within the GSM standard, or as to how this particular part of the telecommunication system works with a third-party vendor, right? So most of the data that passes through here is all in plain text. So they probably have the mobile banking PIN, but they need to now have your phone number tied to that particular PIN so that they can transact. So they'll tell you to switch off, they swap the SIM card, they dial whatever code, or they go to the mobile banking app, register, they get the OTP, then they will withdraw the money. That's how that fraud was perpetrated.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that.
Anyway, welcome, Baron.
Sorry, Mr. Clive, you may continue.
There's someone asking, there's a question here. How does fraud occur via mobile apps that generate fake M-Pesa payment messages, yet the transaction reflect on another system? That's Ian Kimron.
Uh-huh.
The second question is from Walter Buyu. Do you think the proceeds of crime and anti-money laundering act is sufficiently stringent?
Uh-huh.
Then the third one from Ayuma is, what is your advice to end users of those bank mobile apps?
Okay. Okay, so let me first tackle the fake M-Pesa messages. I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but I'll speak on to that, although it's a bit technical. So if you've noticed, M-Pesa doesn't have a phone number. It's just M-Pesa. Yeah, at times even Airtel Money, I think it's Airtel Money. There's a way to generate that message, but it's a bit technical, and I doubt your local scammers and fraudsters would go to that extent. So I'm not quite sure how that happens. I'd need to look deeper into that. But my suspicion again still is about insider, people who can craft messages. Because I remember there's even a friend of mine who works in one of the mobile operators. So he called me. He called my phone, dialed my number, but when I picked the phone to check who's calling, I saw it's my number calling me, right? So that was an interesting prank. So he asked him, so hey, how are you able to do that? So he said, you know what, it's called it's a technical term in GSM. So they're able to display whatever it is that they want to be shown. It can even say M-Pesa is calling you. So they have that control in the back end, and they normally do it for troubleshooting. But this one for fake messages, I suspect it could be that line. I could be wrong, but I'd have to look into that. So second question, Mr. Walter Buyo, glad that you joined us. AML and proceeds of crime, I don't think it's sufficient, because back then, and especially with this particular case and 2 more cases that I handled, you realize that the penalties are not punitive. And there's no law that says, unlike the RICO law, and I like referring to it because it really helps in bridging some of these gaps. The RICO law states that if you're going to pay for a fine, you can't pay it from, you need to tell friends to send you money, and family, you need to raise that money. You can't use your funds because your funds are frozen to begin with. So you can't access that. So you can't use the proceeds of crime to, pay for your fine. But locally, I highly doubt that happens. I don't think we have tight enough laws to try and stem, especially people who have been prosecuted and they are given irreasonable amounts of fines. Like the one I mentioned, these guys were slapped with a 20 million fine, and then they paid for it. On AML, I think AML stands for anti-money laundering law. CBK has done a very good job in constantly revising the prudential guidelines, and they've come down heavy, especially on banks, to be very stringent with this. To an extent that if you have opened an account, I think within the last 1 year or 2 years, you realize that banks nowadays are asking for more information. And even a simple case in point, if you ever have foreign currency, especially dollars, and you have more than $1,000 and you want to go and exchange for Kenyan shillings at the bank, they will take you through hoops. They'll even ask you, where do you live? Because it's a regulation from CBK. They want to understand, so you have about $1,000. Where do you have above that? Where did you get the currency from? So if you say it's business, so show us the invoice. If you say it was sent by a relative, okay, so show us the transfer. So it's very strict nowadays. In fact, I was very shocked because I did that, and I had to really explain where the money was coming from. So I think more needs to be done, especially with proceeds of crime. But AML, I can strongly say that CBK has done a very good job at trying to tighten those loose ends. And then the last question was advice to mobile money app users. What I'd suggest is, of course, download it from the Play Store and make sure that it's actually signed by the bank. You need to first establish if your bank has a mobile money app. If it doesn't, then there must be an alternative, maybe USSD. Like I know most circles are using USSD. Number 2, you always need to make sure that your phone is always up to date. The good thing is that nowadays banks will not allow you to install some of their apps if your phone is below a certain model. So for instance, if you are running Android 5 and below, I don't think there's any mobile banking app that will be accepted by your device, because the OS is outdated and it's not supported. Then number 3, it's always good to go to, what the bank sells. So for instance, you can either go to their website, if they have a pamphlet, you can visit the branch, you can call them and ask them about the mobile banking app and everything. Because the same way you trust, you don't put money in the mattress. There's a reason why you put your money in the bank, which means you trust your bank. So if they give you an app, then it's just an extension of that trust, right? And if they are going to have any customer care line, you need to know what number they call you through or what number you can reach them. But what I see nowadays is that every time you do a mobile banking transfer, say B2C bank to customer, you normally see there's a hotline down there. They say, if you didn't perform this transaction, please call this number, right? Because nowadays, it's always good to also have alerts, banking alerts. Most banks offer that. So once your account is credited or it's debited, you'll always receive an alert. And if you didn't authorize that, then there's a number to call down there. So these are just some of the small, simple hygiene steps that you can take to protect yourself and also your funds.
Another question from Freddy Kwaume. Do you feel the regulators within the mobile space and money are doing enough to mitigate the risk and assist Kenyans? In this case, he's talking about CBK and the Communications Authority.
Thanks for that question, Fred. I think for CBK, they're doing a good job, and especially because CBK doesn't talk directly to the customer. They don't talk directly to you as the depositor. So they do it through the banks and also through the association, Kenya Bankers Association. And that's why you see every time you go to the ATM hall or the banking hall, there are all these posters. So it's just it's a matter of sensitization and try to reach to the customers. And also those SMSs you always get. So that's another initiative that comes from CBK, not through the Bankers Association or the bank itself, because the bank interfaces with the depositor who is you. So for CA as well, they have several initiatives. I think there's one called Car Chonjo or something, and they normally have these outreaches that they go to certain removed parts of town where probably information doesn't get to people, and they advise people on how do you take care of yourself online, without getting too technical. And there's also, I think there's another one called something Kikao. They used to have it sometime back in 2015. I don't know if they still do it. So they have these outreach messages, and even on mainstream media, they used to have these commercials, especially during prime time, and they'd tell you, Car Chonjo, do not share your PIN, do not share sensitive information about you, do not share your ID with someone. If anything happens, talk directly to your bank, don't talk to the guard. These sensitization efforts that have gone into educating the customers. A lot more can be done, but I think I always compare it to civic education. Civic education is very difficult unless the public has an interest. Like when it comes to voting, then people will be keen. But now when it comes to personal finances and how it is that you take care of your gadget and how to prevent fraud and everything, I find it the uptake is a bit slow. But it's not to say that they're not trying. I can honestly say the banks are trying. The banks and some circles are trying.
Thank you. Another question from Ross Mwangi. When asked for a ransom, how is that dealt with, especially when you don't have a backup of that data?
So now that is in the line of ransomware. For some of these ransomware malware that is out there, you will pay that money and you still not get your data back. So it's an extortion scheme. So the best thing you can do is, first and foremost, always back up your data. Have a backup of your backup. Nowadays, even cloud backup services are quite affordable, from Dropbox to Google to everyone else. They're quite affordable. Hard drives have also become affordable. So I would always say there's no excuse for you not to have a backup of your backup, right? Number two, then it's easier. It becomes easier if you're infected. Then perhaps what you lose is not significant compared to how much it is that you have backed up, right? Because most of these ransomware malware, they don't work. You pay via Bitcoins or you send via credit card, they just keep extorting you. It's actually a cycle that never ends. So it's a way of minting you, and they know how much precious your data is. So above all, always have an up-to-date antivirus. I think that has been preached until our faces are blue. Always have an updated antivirus. Constantly run antivirus checks. Don't go to suspicious sites that you're looking for cracked versions of software. That's why you get infected. Or even this, in fact, nowadays, the best breeding ground for that malware is these online streaming websites for Premier League. That's where they're getting people. So you log in there, you stream, there's so many adverts happening here and there. You click on something, boom, then you have malware installed on your phone or your PC. So avoid suspicious sites, have an updated antivirus, run your antivirus scans regularly. You can even schedule it when you go to bed so that it does a full deep scan. And at the same time, have a backup of your backup.
For now, I think this is the last questions. 2 questions from Bernard Mahake. 1, how safe are the cybersecurity consultants like you? Do you need state security when investigating sensitive cases? 2, how far has AI gone to help in cybercrime prevention, detection, and forensics?
That's a very good question. I especially love question number 1, Bernard. I actually, when I was working somewhere, I was investigating a very high-profile fraud that was being conducted by the head of compliance in that organization. And he was in cahoots with one of the managers and 2 departmental heads within IT. And some of the things that I started questioning was his lifestyle and everything. And so I started making enemies too soon. So I had to leave that job. It's not that serious. It's not that you don't lose your life over a job, and especially when you're trying to reel into someone. So for me, I don't think we need state security. I think this is a job like any other. But however, I think for me, that's why I always feel it's good to involve DCI. If you use the DCI cybercrime division and they know you're onto a fraud, so it's always good to have that as a backup. So they can tell you, okay, for this case, I'd suggest you can investigate up to here, leave this to us. They'll be like, okay, if you can get me this evidence, that's fine, because my client is waiting for it. So AI and fraud detection, it's working, but we are still far away locally. Locally, we are still far away from adopting products that implement AI as part of fraud detection and also prevention. There were some initiatives that had been started locally. There was actually one I was involved in, trying to create what we'd call a mobile fraud detection system based on a mathematical model that is used to detect fraud on checks. Yeah. So it was just a POC. So we did a POC, but I don't know how far it went. But it was supposed to be something that was to be adopted, and the idea had been sold even to CBK just to see how it is that we can start rolling out such local products to mitigate against fraud. So for now, it's pretty manual, and then there's no box you can plug into the bank and say this is going to monitor frauds. It's always monitored in silos. So you have your perimeter security, you have your SIEMs doing incident detection and mitigation. On the other hand, you have your firewalls. On the other hand, you have your web application firewalls. You have your endpoint security products. So it's very isolated. So that's why even when I walked you through the presentation, I told you we are getting logs from different things, trying to mate them together and see how it is that you can map out the fraud. So yeah, we're still a long way from getting AI involved in fraud detection.
Thank you, Tyrants. I think the questions are, someone has said about AI, but the questions have been good. The session has been very, very informative. I've learned a lot. We might not finish this conversation. Some of us are interested in the insider fraud, and it's an area that is really, really interesting, especially cyber facilitated insider fraud, where malware is planted in. And I think we can have that conversation another time. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for taking your time, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Harriet. Hello, Harriet.
Hello, Clive. Thank you for facilitating that particular session, and thank you so much, Tyrus, for that particular powerful session. I also must admit that I've learned a lot, and I would like to learn more. And from the comments, from the questions, I can see that there's a lot of interest in this particular area, and we hope that when we call you back, you will still be able to share the knowledge that you have, those who are coming in this particular field. So next in line, we are going to have our third speaker. And I will not say anything about him, but I will introduce Varun. Varun, you will facilitate this particular session. So I want to welcome you so that you can introduce the next speaker and tell us what he's going to talk about. Varun.
Sure. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you.
So our next speaker would be Amarjit Laburam. He's an offensive security researcher and has done research work on very many attacks. Some of them include making fully undetectable backdoors using NIM-based payloads or Print Nightmare and many others. He has also been my mentor and I have learned quite a lot from him. I may be biased when I'm saying this, but at least in my opinion, or according to me, Amarjit is one of the best offensive security person in Kenya. So if you need any help or anything, I feel he's the right person to approach in terms of offensive security, at least. Let me not say everything. Let me even give Amarjit a chance to say his long profile. And yes, Amarjit, handing over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Varun, thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you very much for everyone for making time to come and join us for this mini conference. KCSFA, fantastic work. I hope to see more conferences like these come out, and to the previous speakers, great presentations before. I will start off my presentation. Let me just know if you guys can see my slides. I'm just loading that right now. Let me know if you can see my screen.
You can see your screen.
All right. So we'll start off a little bit about myself. As Varun has already introduced me, my name is Amarjit Laburam. I'm the technical director at Macrosec Limited, which is a local cybersecurity institution founded in Kenya in 2016. I perform cybersecurity research work and pen testing and red teaming operations for the organization. And I really like looking into various security flows, especially related around Windows, and developing tactics and techniques that adversaries are using and trying to simulate that for clients. My hobbies are farming, fishing, DJing electronic music, and I'm a foodie. So as naturally as anybody who likes writing code, coffee is one of my favorite beverages. So what are we going to learn today? Basically, we're going to look at what malware is and go through a bit of a history about malware, and then the languages that various malwares are being written in. Then we will look into some of the techniques that malware implement. Particularly, we'll be looking at what's called process injection. And then we will actually go into proof of concept and write up a little malware that will execute shellcode, and we'll do that in NIM. And then we'll do another one that's going to be a bit more sneakier than the one we write in NIM, and that one we'll write in Go. I'll also explain further as we go why the choice of the languages. So what is malware? Malware, in short, is malicious software. And as per the definition from Wikipedia, a malware is software, is any software intentionally designed to cause damage to a computer, server, client, or computer network. That should not be mistaken with a bug. Bugs are usually issues that are in code, but they were not intentionally put there. So the difference between a bug can also be malicious, but then it was not done intentionally, so that's why we refer them as bugs, whereas malware is anything that's intentionally built to do malicious activity. There are various types of malwares that are out there. You have computer viruses, worms, Trojan horses, spyware, adware. You have rogue software, and one of our favorites we all know is ransomware. I think even Tyrus in the previous talk mentioned about using rogue software, stuff like that. That's by using illegally pirated tools, sometimes come embedded with these viruses inside them. And programs are also considered malware if they secretly act against the interest of a computer user. So there was a case that happened for, I think it was Sony, where they were trying to protect copyright infringement of their records. So they had a software that would get installed on users' machines, and it would basically ensure that a user cannot make an illegal copy of music from their CDs or whatever. But in essence, it was also checking out what sort of music the user listens to and getting data analysis from that, which is against user rights. So with the Data Privacy Act that we all are aware of, such kind of things would be considered malicious. So that's why sometimes even legit software may perform actions that would be malicious to an end user, would be considered malicious to an end user. The next thing we're looking at is the history of malware. Malware has come a long way. Malware initially was found back in the 80s. And back then, most of these were malicious programs that would be written into boot sectors and, either perform extraction of information or, some not benign, but malicious activity, but not to the scale that we know of malware in the common day and age of today. So as technologies started getting more streamlined and standardized, certain types of malware started proliferating. You have a lot of, like you say, macro-based viruses. These are viruses that were now getting embedded into like Office documents and getting distributed. That now also got more enhanced when email became a thing. So it was much easier for threat actors or malicious actors to then now infect targets and victims, because we could now exchange documents if you embed your malware in there. So as the years progressed and as more technology adoption got taken up, the more attack vectors started getting seen and more unique types of malware started coming across. So this also went out through the 2000s, and you get a lot of, there was a time you'd open your browser and you'd get weird pop-ups coming up and those kind of things. These are all now basically JavaScript-based malware. And of course, as I said, this is anything that's done that's not supposed to be happening on a machine. So even like having those pop-ups come up and restricting your internet access, sort of causing a denial of service, those kind of situations were frequently seen back in those days. Then malware started enhancing and developing, as I said, as more technology was adopted. So in the last decade, we've been seeing like Internet of Things, cryptocurrency. So there's various threat surfaces that are now being introduced. And if we do not keep a vigilant watch on these and test these things out before rolling out, like we mentioned for the mobile apps in the previous talk, it can really impact and create a lot of chaotic issues. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the, was it the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack that happened recently, though that was not related to an IoT issue, but then it was the use of weak tools and processes within the network, and that's how the threat actors got in. But industrial computer systems have been targeted since 2010. Case in scenario, Stuxnet virus. This was a very unique and I would say, to me, it was a very insightful design of malware. And basically, this specific malware was targeting Iranian uranium enriching plants. And if it got, apparently there was a statement that was said that almost 70% of the world's computers at that time got infected by Stuxnet, but because of the way it was designed, it was only going to explode or have its malicious payload execute when it was in a particular environment, which was these uranium enriching plants in Iran. So it had a control measure around it that it would, even if it infected your machine, the main payload will not, or the main infection will not run because it's not in that specified environment. So again, something malware developers then started using, we look at it, some called environmental keying. So this is a way we can use specific information about our targets to be put within the malware, that if it does not meet those requirements, it should not proceed and execute the malicious nature of its intended purpose. Yeah. Then in 2013, there was the case of CryptoLocker. This was an early instance of ransomware, and basically it was a Trojan horse that locked files on user computers, prompting them to pay ransom for the decryption key. Then, of course, 2017 saw another major ransomware attack, which came in the form of WannaCry, which was very heavy. It leveraged an exploit technique that was discovered by the NSA. So how it would be able to propagate and move throughout the network. So that's why I said malware is always constantly changing and evolving based on the infrastructure and threat landscape that's out there. I mean, the attack surface that's out there. So with the WannaCry, luckily there was a researcher who found a kill switch, which was within the ransomware code, and they were able to contain it. So back then, that was one way of sorting it out. Then came 2020, saw a new type of attack vector called, called a supply chain attack. And it was particularly against SolarWinds, where threat actors had managed to gain access into their source code for a specific product, and they were able to embed malicious DLL and files. DLL are dynamic link libraries. So these are small files or programs, mini programs that run within the context of a specific application framework. And with these infected DLLs and these programs being shipped out to client networks, because SolarWinds deals with infrastructure asset management. So a lot of large corporations use their products to manage assets. So the fact that the threat actor infected the vendor, they were then able to gain access to all the vendors' clients that were using that particular product, running that specifically patched edition. So that's now how threat actors are evolving to now get more access into people's networks. So phishing is not just one way, they also look at various ways they can spread and get the infections out there. When it comes to programming languages for malware, it's a very open-ended market, but then again, I would say it comes down to the main objective of the code writer. So C is usually a general purpose programming language. It can be used to write all sorts of malware for different computing environments, such as desktop servers and grid computing. And basically an exploit takes advantage of a weakness in an operating system or application or software code, including the application plugins. So these exploits come in all shapes. And so when you're looking at now the next part, sorry, that was supposed to be for JavaScript. So JavaScript and ActionScript, VBScript, Java is often used for computer exploits. But this would be now like an application. For example, when it comes to your web browser, you've heard of recently in the news, there's been a lot of zero-day exploits around Google Chrome. So if you have not yet patched, definitely go and do that. The exploits basically allowed for remote code execution. So that means an attacker can send a malicious piece of code to your browser, and your browser will perform specific actions based on that code and eventually give them full code execution on your device. So JavaScript is a good example of how malicious threat actors can use that and leverage a software and its plugins to then perform, code injection or SQL injection or cross-site scripting. It depends on what their end goal is with that particular attack. Another programming language that's used for developing malware is Python. Python is, I would say, it's simpler than C, and it doesn't need to be compiled, which may translate to source code files into the other types of code. So you don't necessarily have to compile and create a binary or an executable for you to be able to execute your code. So you can run Python code directly through the interpreters. Then we have what we call high-level malware. So these are usually written in C#, C++, and C. Those are the most common ones I know, especially when looking around Windows malware. And this type of malware is more complex than the average virus and can take significant amounts of time to develop, because you can scale out to instead of just being a malware that gives a shell code and a reverse access to your target, you can actually write tool exploits around this thing that would then exfiltrate and automate the whole data process around it. So it's now up to the developer to take it to whatever they want with the tool. An example of these like C# exploits and stuff like that, there was a point of sale malware attack, I think in 2013. And basically this malware would go and pick out account numbers, expiry dates, and CVV codes from for any, because it's a point of sale device, or it attacks this point of sale frameworks. So basically CVV codes for the credit card, the expiration date of the credit card, and the account number of the credit card would be stolen and shipped out of these shops or tellers that had these POSs that were running the malware in it. Finally, you have Java, which would be the most common one when it comes to building malware for apps, especially, for mobile phones, especially Android-based mobile phones, because a lot of Android applications rely on Java, and at times they have a bit of C and C++ enhancements through it. So when it comes to writing malware for mobiles, as I said, especially for Android, Java would be one of the favorite languages used. So there's been an evolution in how malware is being written, especially for Windows domains. Cyber attackers are using less common languages such as Go, NIM, Rust, D, F#, and all this is just to evade detection and find network weak spots. So researchers have been finding what we call exotic programming languages. These are the ones like I just mentioned, the Go, Rust, NIM, and D, and all these. A lot of that is now being increasingly employed by malicious threat actors. And some groups have even taken the opportunity to branch out and try other exotic languages to address pain points in the development process. So basically you'd find like, you're developing a malware that's supposed to inject into a process and all that. There's certain like calls that have to be made. And you find when you're working with a language like C, because it's a very low level programming language, you are able to easily interface and get these API calls that you need. But then if you're working with another language like C#, it might require you to then use certain specific API calls to then make those requests. So with some of these languages like Go and NIM especially, they're very C oriented. So it becomes natively very easy to compile, port something that you'd already written in C and port it and create a new version of it in these languages. So a lot of reasons behind why people are moving to these. And as you can see from the screen, threat actors have been enhancing a lot of their payloads and droppers with these various languages. Well, when it comes to using uncommon languages, like you'd ask me, why use uncommon languages? New languages are typically adopted as they improve upon a deficit in an existing language. So the creators would be in search of a simpler syntax or performance boosts or more efficient memory management. So the nature of the new language could then better suit the environment for which it's being used. For example, in Internet of Things, devices use low-level languages such as C or assembly because they are able to communicate directly to the boards and all these things. So malware analysis, so using these uncommon languages, you'll probably be able, as I mentioned, to do the same thing that the C code you're writing in possibly in Go or NIM or Rust, right? So you're now given more choice of flexibility to use a different language, and it might give you even better performance or memory management when you're doing your exploit development. Then malware analysis tooling does not always adequately support exotic programming languages. So this means that this failing can make analysis, that's for now the blue teamers, the incident responders, it can make and these efforts more tedious because you have to sift through unlabeled library code and rabbit hole subroutines because it's not native code that most of these tools that are out of the box can reverse engineer. Then another reason why uncommon language is also getting more and more popular is a lot of detection around malware is signature based. So this depends on specific static characteristics being present within a file. So if those qualities do not exist, any defensive tool like an antivirus that relies on signature, how do you put it? That relies on signature analysis of files, then you can go around bypassing those signature detections by using these uncommon languages. So something that's already known as a C++ or a C based malware can be ported and written in these other languages, and the same code now when it's, once it's compiled and dropped to disk, it may not flag off any signatures because now it's got complete different signature that AVs may not have in their databases. So when it comes to obfuscation, an argument can be made that uncommon programming languages on their own already act as a layer of obfuscation because, as I said, the flow of how the code is written may not be the same and the type of structs that are being requested. So they can appear quite alien when you try and disassemble and try reading the source code of that binary. So again, that's why the whole obfuscation and reverse engineering of the malware becomes something a malicious threat actor would want. Then another reason for using some of these languages is cross-compilation. In theory, cross-compilation provides an attacker the option of authoring the same malware variant containing same or similar functionalities in one language and having it cross-compiled for different target architectures and operating systems. So be it for Linux, Windows, Mac, whatever operating system you want to target for, if the end goal of the malware is the same and it can run across any of these platforms, then you can just use one simple code to compile for those specific architectures. So it reduces the overhead for somebody who is developing for a scenario where you might be attacking different types of operating systems or their different architectures, so whether it's x64 or x86. So we're going to look at, as I mentioned, part of this talk is going to be about also writing malware. So before we get to the writing part, there's some things I'd like to get out of the way so that when we dive in, we have enough information about what we're doing. So one of the primary ways malicious threat actors execute code or malicious code on targets is using shellcode. So as per the definition of Wikipedia, shellcode is basically any small piece of code that is used as the payload exploitation of software vulnerabilities. The reason it's called a shellcode is because it typically starts a small command shellcode from which the attacker can then control the target machine. So an exploit will commonly inject a shellcode into a target process before or at the same time as it exploits the vulnerability to gain control over the program counter. So the program counter is something in memory, and this is how shellcode is then leveraged to then run once it's executed into memory. So a program counter is adjusted to the point of the shellcode. So it's given where the shellcode resides, after which it gets the execution and performs its now tasks going forward. So injecting the shellcode is often done by storing the shellcode in some form of data that could be sent over the network or on a file, and it's then sent to the vulnerable process. And then it is through this command line, an environment of an exploitation is carried through where the shellcode then gets executed into a process. We looked into that a little bit deeper into the specific technique that we will be covering for today's session. So we're going to be looking at a technique known as process injection. And basically, process injection is a method of executing arbitrary code, which in our case is our shellcode, in the address space of a separate live process, or it could be a process that we have opened. So we've created a new process, or it's something that's already existing and running in the target machine. So adversaries may inject code into processes in order to evade process-based defenses, as well as possibly elevating privileges. Process injection is a method of executing code in the space of a live process, and running the code in the context of another process may allow access to that process's memory. So if you're running in a process that has a high privilege and you have the access rights to access that process, you can technically elevate your privilege on a box or on a victim. There are many different ways of injecting code into a process, many of which you abuse legitimate functions that are in Windows or in operating systems. So these implementations exist for every major operating system, but are typically platform specific. So when we talk of process injection in Windows, it's not going to be the same function calls that would be used in Linux or Mac, but the technique can be leveraged across the operating systems. That's just now how you'd write your code for the various operating systems. And as you can see in the image on the screen, basically you have a target process that's running. So it's already on your victim machine, and when your malware is executed, it will go and create a new section of memory on the target process and then inject some piece of code into that memory space that's allocated. And once it's injected that code there, it will run a thread and reopen that process. So it'll create a new thread under the process, which technically will execute the malicious code that you're injecting. So as we mentioned, we'll be working on Windows victims. So for this, there are certain Windows API calls that will be needed by us for us to generate this malicious code that would then do these activities. So the first API is called Open Process API. This allows us to access the memory space of a targeted process. And as you saw in the previous image, so you have a process that's running. For us to be able to get a handle or to be able to touch that, we need the Open Process API to give us control to that process and then put it in a state called suspended. So that suspended state then allows us to now be able to do the next phase of the attack, which would then now leverage the next Windows API called Virtual Unlock X. This then allows us to create memory. So remember, the process was there running, and we needed to now expand the memory space so that we can inject our shellcode. So Virtual Unlock X gives us the ability to then now create that memory space within the running process, or rather the suspended process. Then we then use, when you're also creating that memory space, there's certain, like, just like you have file properties on your Windows or Linux machines, you can check for them. You know, you have read, write, and execution properties. So even these memory spaces that get created, they have these different properties available to them. So you can either have a read-only memory allocation, you can have a read-write memory allocation, or read-execute, or read-write-execute. So depending on the type of request you also make using Virtual Unlock X, you the ideal thing is to be able to have one that's read, write, execute. But with the modern day of EDRs, that's endpoint detection and response, having such API calls can be a red flag. So if you're doing like a red teaming, or you're doing a pen test and you're going up against an EDR environment, then this would not be the ideal way of opening. There are other ways of breaking it down. But in our scenario, we're just going to ask for read-write access to that memory space, and then we will then use the write process memory API to then write our shellcode to the now allocated memory space. And then the last Windows API that we can use is called the create remote thread. So this then executes a thread of this suspended process, which will inject our shellcode and basically execute in the background. So ideally, this is what we're going to be writing for our demo or technical side of the talk. So the first thing is we're going to use NIM to write our code. Basically, a bit about NIM. NIM is designed to support multiple programming paradigms, including object-oriented programming. This design makes code reuse and metaprogramming easier. And in addition to that, there's a built-in support for binding to C, C++, and Objective-C libraries with these. So this allows developers to make use of existing functionality in already implemented programs and languages, especially from these C and C++ based languages. And then the other good thing about NIM is it can be cross-compiled for all major operating systems, such as Windows, Linux, BSD, Mac OS. And these binaries can be statically or dynamically linked, depending on the customization during the time of compilation. So when you do it statically, you basically have everything embedded in your application, so it can run managed code directly from the binary that gets compiled. So what are we going to do? So the objective of our code for today is we're going to write a simple process injector. So we're going to create a shellcode, and we're going to take that shellcode and inject it into a specific program, and we're going to be leveraging these Windows APIs that we mentioned of Virtual Unlock X, write process memory, create remote thread. And we're going to do this. We're going to call for Notepad process to be spawned and put into a suspended state. And then we're going to allocate some memory on this Notepad process, from where we're going to inject our shellcode into that, and then execute the create remote thread, which will then execute the thread now back from suspended state, and therefore inject our shellcode and basically execute it. So we're just going to read through a bit of the code before we actually go and do this manually. So the first thing is, as you can see on the screen, that's a little bit, that's how NIM's programming language structures are. So the first thing is we're going to try and access some specific Windows API libraries. And to do that, you can import two libraries. I think it's the WinIM and the OSPROC library. So these allow us to then now use these Windows APIs. So for the first, as you can see on the screen, we're going to leverage a Windows API called Start Process and another one called Open Process, which we already talked about. So with start process, it's going to start the notepad process. And then to be able to then now go and now create those memory allocations and everything, we will get a handle to this notepad process using the open process API and put the notepad process into a suspended state. So once we have that suspended state and we have this notepad process running and we have a handle on it based on the process ID of that notepad process, we will then use the virtual alloc X API to then allocate memory on this notepad process. And then we're going to specify the size of the memory we want. So remember, when we're creating our shellcode, we can get an output of the size of the shellcode. So when we're now requesting for that memory allocation, we can specify the memory space size we need for us to then write our shellcode into. So this is the first request. We're just asking for, can we get access to this process, and can we get access to this amount of memory space? And as you can see, we want to be able to execute, read, and write in this memory space. So the next bit of the code, we're then now going to leverage the write process memory API to then write our shellcode, which is as a byte array, into that specific memory location that we did in the previous step. Then the next part, we're going to then execute the create remote thread. We're going to leverage the create remote thread API to then execute this thread that has the shellcode already injected in it. And if it all works well with a successful exploit, we should be able to then create a notepad process that will inject our shellcode. And for our first demo, we're going to be just popping calc. So it's nothing too complex, but we're going to generate shellcode from calc using MSF Venom. I think one of the slides already had the syntax for the command to do that. So once we've generated that shellcode, we're going to use that into the code. And if everything works as mentioned, it should then create a notepad process that will then pop up calc on the target machine. So let's go ahead and compile this. I'm going to switch my screens. Just let me know. If you're able to see, you should be seeing a Windows, Windows machine. Just let me know if from the chat, or can someone unmute and let me know?
We can't see it yet.
Okay, let me just do a share. How about now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, so we're just going to open. So basically, I have NIM installed, the NIM compiler installed on this Windows machine. And as I said, what we saw on the slides was code snippets of this entire code. So as I mentioned, we'll need to import certain libraries. That's the WinIM and the OSProc. These allow us to then call those Windows functions that we need to then inject our process. I then used this command, and you will notice that I've used C# here because MSF Venom does not technically generate shellcode for NIM, but NIM, since it uses the common language runtime environment, it's very similar to C#. So generating a C# shellcode technically can be used in NIM as well. So using MSF Venom, I just created a shellcode that will pop up calc, and I made sure that the shellcode is in C#. If I switch here, can you see the Linux machine?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so as I mentioned, that's the same shellcode in F#. When you run it using MSF Venom, it gives you the byte, and this is usually the byte size of the shellcode, and that's the actual code. And remember, shellcode is machine language. I mean, it's not human readable. It's machine language can interpret it and know what the application is trying to do. So this one is just going to be executing calc on the target. So we'll take this code and just replace it. So you can see, if you look at the first 3 bytes lines, it's 0xfc 4883, which is the same as this fc 4883. So we've just basically generated the shell code, come to our code, replaced it over here. And as we looked at, as we went through the code earlier, we can see the different procedures we're going to do. So we know we want to start a suspended process, and then we're going to open a process handle to get the process ID. And for this instance, we're looking to target Notepad. So we need to get, once we've opened Notepad, we then need to get an ID, the process ID for that particular process, so that we can now go into the next part, which was allocating memory in this Notepad process. And that's where we take now the length of the, the shellcode size. So we know what size we want, what size of memory we need to allocate for this shellcode, and the type of permissions we want to set for it. So this is, as I mentioned, read, write, and execute memory space. Then we then go ahead and write this shellcode. So it's directly writing. We're not, we're just taking this entire block of code here and writing it to that memory space using this. Once that gets written and it's successfully placed in, it will then go and run the create remote thread to then execute a thread with a shellcode injected into it. And if everything works, we should then get a message on the, what do you call it, in our command prompt or PowerShell that it works, and we should also see a calc popping up. So we have this code already here, and basically to compile it, we run this. So let's go to that section. Sorry. So basically we're going to, this is the one, sorry, this is the file we've got open here, msecnim2. So to compile this, we'll run this command. And if it compiles successfully, it should tell us that we have a file called msecnim2.exe. Before we do anything further, there's just some things I want to check out on this machine. So one, we're running Windows 10 version 20H2. Then we have antivirus running on it. I don't need that. Updates, it's updated at today, about an hour ago. And real-time protection is on, cloud delivery protection is on. Of course, I've disabled this because I don't want my samples to be sent up for analysis online. But if you're ever developing malware in your whatever environment you're running it, ensure you turn this off if you don't want your hard-earned work to be blown away if your sample is submitted to Microsoft for them to analyze and reverse engineer and try and find out what it's trying to do. So we know these settings are there. For the first instance, we're just going to run this executable, and it should give us, before we even do that, I'll also open another tool called Process Hacker. So remember, we said we're going to be executing this binary, this compiled code, which will then create a process notepad, put it into a suspended state, and then inject the shellcode into that, which when the thread resumes, it will then pop calc. So all that will happen like in real time. So you may not see a lot of things, but just when I run the next command, just observe over here if you see any notepad process spawning, and we'll also see some of the information that will come here. And if all goes well, we should also get a calculator popping. So if I do this, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Sorry, it was 2. and there. So you see how fast all that happened. And we already have, so we saw it opened a suspended process 5644, and even that's already closed on this side. It has injected, and we know it works because it has popped up calc. No warnings, no issues from Defender. As I said, this I don't need. Sorry, okay, yeah. So we should not be having any warnings in terms of this thing. So we've been able to successfully pop calc using NIM. And that was using a shellcode written in MSF Venom, loaded into this shellcode loader, written in NIM, using process injection technique. We're able to inject that shellcode and pop calc with this. So that was writing malware in NIM. So the next part, we're going to look at another programming language that's commonly used for writing malware these days, and that's Go. So Go is an open source statically typed compiled language. The compiler was originally written in C, but then it was rewritten with Go in 2015. And Go is actually a language that came out in 2007. It has syntax that's similar to C, but unlike C, it also offers garbage collection, structural typing, and concurrency. And just like another language close to it, like Rust, it also has a lot of memory safety involved in it. So when you're working with like what we're doing, we're trying to inject into memory of programs, such languages come in very handy to be able to do these kind of exploits and making sure that you do not go and crash things because you have proper understanding, or rather it gives you proper, how would I say, control on these memory spaces. So in Go, memory management is handled automatically at runtime, so which also helps reduce the common vulnerabilities caused by memory safety issues. Just like NIM, Go is also cross-compilable, so it can write malware for various operating systems and architectures, so has similar properties to NIM in that regard. So we'll go through a bit of what we're going to do. This time we're going to be a bit more sneakier. Last time we were creating Notepad in a suspended state and then injecting into it and executing. So this time we want to make sure that we are going to execute into a process that's already existing or running in the target machine, so you don't have to spawn a new process. And then we're going to because this time we're going to use now Metapreter shellcode. So we're actually going to inject and see if we can get a reverse shell, not just pop calc like we did with the previous one. So we'll still leverage the same process injection technique where we're going to need those Windows APIs that we've already gone through and do similar steps to the NIM one, just that this time, because we're using a Metapreter that's, a Metapreter shellcode that has heavy antivirus signatures that are already out there, I'm going to use another technique of encrypting the shellcode into this source code. And then when it compiles and gets executed, when it's executing, it's going to decrypt that shellcode in memory before finally executing and doing what we did with the previous one. And the other thing is also when I'm compiling this next one, I'm going to compile it as a DLL. So as I mentioned earlier, which is a dynamic link library. This allows us as an attacker to then use lolbin tactics. Lolbin tactics means living off the land. So we can literally use already, if we drop this binary, I don't need to have the user double click on it. I can call for a specific tool within Windows to execute this. We'll see it now when we get into the live demo. So basically, this is what we're going to try and achieve with the Go malware. So to start off, I'm going to encrypt shellcode. And we're going to use again MSF Venom for this, but this time, as you can see, I'm going to create a Metapreter reverse TCP. So this is a stageless shellcode, meaning everything is within this shellcode. It does not need to go and fetch any piece of the code from the attack server. It contains everything it needs to execute and create that Metapreter session connection to your attack server. With this, I'm going to then pipe the raw shellcode that that is generated into a Python script that's going to run an XOR encryption on that output, and it's going to then generate the output to the specific language. So in our instance, we're doing it in Go. So that's why the -t Go is there to specify the language I want the output in. And -x is the value number for which we're using the XOR iteration on. So in this example, we're going to use 254. So those are the 254 is a critical piece of information we need to keep in mind when we are also compiling our Go source code. So we'll just step through the source code quickly through the slides before we actually go into the various functions that it does, through the code itself in the demo. So the first function in the code looks for a running instance of a particular process, which is called svc host. If the target process is running, it enumerates it, it will then get the process ID of that particular process, which will then be used in the next part of the exploit. So the next part is, so the next part of the code is the XOR functioning. So remember, we encrypted the code using XOR, and we wanted it as Go, and we used the value 254 to encrypt it. So as you can see here, we need to now decrypt it. So this is basically a Go function that will then take our byte array of the shellcode and do an XOR decryption based on the encryption key value that was provided, which is 254. When we go through the full code, I'll show you where that 254 resides. Then the next part of the code is the actual process injection function. So this is where, like we saw in the NIM one, we're going to try and use the Windows APIs, Windows API calls to inject our shellcode. So as you can see on the screen, we have the virtual alloc X, virtual protect X, and write process memory and create remote thread. Of course, the syntax is different because this is Go. But another difference in how we're going to implement this API calls, we're not going to make direct system calls using like the pinvoke platform that we did in NIM. We're actually going to leverage calling these functions through the kernel 32. No, sorry. Yes, sorry. It's from the kernel 32 DLL. So what this does is it now makes us do direct syscalls to what we call kernel land from the user land perspective. So instead of using the common path, which would then go to another DLL called NTDLL, which then makes the call to those with specific high-level Windows APIs, which a lot of times EDRs hook into. This is a method attackers have used to be able to bypass certain EDRs, is by now, instead of going through the regular path, you're making a direct syscall based on a reference table using the kernel 32 DLL. So you're literally able to ask for the same request, but in a different way. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So as you can see here, the way that would work, it's still part of the process injection. As I mentioned, now we're actually calling these API functions for the process injection. But we're going to leverage it through that kernel 32 DLL that we've sort of copied. And if we compile this, we will, as I said, we will use a lolbin to execute it. And if it successfully does the execution, we should then have a Metapreter session, which is a command and control shell on our target victim running on our Kali machine. And hopefully this is a live demo. So if Windows have not done any changes, Windows Defender is not updated, like the signatures of what I've been doing, we should be able to do this all with fully updated Windows Defender running. So we'll switch back to the Windows screen. Kindly let me know if you can see the Windows screen. Is anyone there?
Yes.
Yes, you can see.
All right, awesome.
We are here.
Cool. So we'll now open that code in, which is this one. So what we saw the snippets, this is basically what we're going to be doing. Again, we're going to be importing some libraries for us to be able to interact. And because, as I said, Go, you can compile for various operating systems. There are certain specific libraries you need to import based on the functions that you need. So because we're purely doing this for Windows, we're going to be importing the sys Windows library and a few other Go libraries for us to be able to do the whole process injection. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, as you saw in the slide, we're going to run MSF Venom to generate a Metapreter reverse TCP payload. That's the IP of my attack machine and the port on which it's listening, and the format is raw. So if we go to my Linux machine, I had done that here. And as you can see, I then, after the raw, I then added this piping into the Python 3 XOR. And I used the format for Go, sorry. So I set format to Go and the key value of 254. And I piped that to, because it's going to generate a very large shellcode. Like, I mean, this, you can't even see it here. I'll actually open it for you to see it. And I've piped it into this stageless demo.txt. So if I open that, you can see how large that shellcode is. It's not as small as the one we did for calc. So piping that through your command terminal, you might not be able to see everything, but basically we need to now take this to our Go source code and replace it there. So I'll take that, copy this here, and that's the byte. Yeah, I'd already done this earlier, but then I'll just redo it so that we are together. Okay. So we've got our shellcode that we generated using this and XORed with the 254. So once we've put that in our source code here, we'll look at the functions that we had screenshotted earlier. So this, since I'm generating a DLL, I need to have a function I can call in the main so that if I use run DLL, I can pass that function name for it to know that this is the entry point of the DLL and execute from going forward. So basically that's what these couple of first commands do, right? Which were not shown in the slides, but then we don't really need to get too deep into that. The key things were the XOR functionality. So this was what we used, the code that will decrypt our shellcode. As we saw earlier, this is the find process segment. So this is going to go and look for the process ID for SVC host that's running on the machine. And if it successfully finds that ID, it then now moves into the process injection phase. So it takes that ID that was found here and sees if it can then use these Windows API calls to then create memory space. First of all, get a handle on that SVC host process, create the memory space to then inject our shellcode in, and then, of course, create remote thread to execute our shellcode. So that's written a bit differently because this time, as I said, we're not using the native Windows API, but using direct syscalls through the kernel 32 DLL. So the way the pointers read are slightly different. That's beyond the scope of today's session, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. Once all that is done, The main function is called, and that's where, as I mentioned, it will do the process injection function. And then while the process injection function is running, when it reaches the point for writing the shellcode, it will run the XOR function on the buffer, which is now our shellcode, and use the decryption key of 254 to decrypt it, write it to that specific memory space, and then fully execute it. So that's basically what this code would, this piece of code would do. And to compile it, we simply run this. So basically what this will do, okay, so one thing I'll need to mention, when Go generates its compiled binaries, it carries a lot of extra baggage and functions that may not be required. So we end up having a very large binary. If we go and see the one we did in NIM, which was this number 2, you can see the file is literally 259 KB. So it's a very light, small file. Once we do the one for Go, you'll then see the size of this demo DLL that's going to get created. So, whoops. Let's close this, run it again. So just delete. Okay, that you can see the demo DLL that was done earlier, but I'll just that. We don't have it there. Now we'll compile it. So we'll just so some of the flags that you see there, like the LD flags -S -W, these are specific switches for Go to sort of at least try and compress the size of the output binary that is generated. So it may strip out certain functions that are not needed, that if you don't use these flags, can bloat up the size of your final binary that gets generated. So if this runs properly, we should then, it might take some few minutes. Okay, that's done. If I run an ls now, you can see it's then generated the demo.dll, and you can see the size of that binary. So if we go to the actual folder, you can see this thing is almost 1.5 MB, 1.63 MB. So it's quite a large file. Of course, also the type of shellcode we have input into it is big, as you saw it. So that also factors in. But sending that larger file to a victim can also be a bit daunting. Before we do this, I need to ensure that I have a session, a Metasploit session handler running so that I can catch that shell when it comes in. So for this, we'll do ms console. So with this one, as we said, we know we've used a Metapreter, Windows Metapreter x64 payload, where this is the IP of our attack server, and that's the port that's running. We have our handler running here, so we're ready to catch any, shell that we may get. Before we even do that, now, this folder on the desktop called Weaponized, I've excluded it from scanning from, Windows Defender. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to drop the binary. I'll delete this one. I'm going to drop the binary here and see if we will get any detections. So this is a malicious weaponized payload. If I drop it here, we don't get any alerts. If I scan, zero threats found, so everything seems fine. So we know this is on the desktop. So cd to the desktop. And we can see it's here. So to run this, as I said, I'm going to use a lol bin So I'll use the run DLL tool to run this. And the file is demo. And remember the function we had was called boom. That was our main function here. So to make sure that this DLL executes from that starting entry point, we will use the function name boom to call it. Now, again, I will run process hacker here. This time we will not see much because it's going to go and inject into these processes called SVC hosts. And if you go to your Windows machine, you'll find there are several instances. So it will go through all of these and pick one that it has access to. And we will get, I think we should be able to see the actual process number. So the PID that we're looking for and which one it will inject into out of all of these, right? I'll just also minimize this slightly so that we can see on the Linux side if we do get a connection back. Just minimize this a little bit. If we run this, and as you can see, no alerts, and we have a Metapreter session open. So if you come to this side, nothing has popped up. Defender is still, it's going to complain about threat protection, but in terms of virus threat protection, nothing has popped up. So we can see we have bypassed Windows Defender successfully. So if I do sessions, we have a session there. If I interact with it, you can see with that. If I do ipconfig, we get the IP address of our victim. We can do, we can get the process list. So you can see the different processes. So basically, we have command and control, and we've bypassed Windows Defender on that machine, and we've injected into a legit process that's running. So even with Process Hacker, you'd not see any, weird process that's running called, MS, it was called what? MS-sec go or demo DLL, for example. And I guess with that, it comes to the end of my presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Amarjit, for this wonderful presentation. I guess we can give a few minutes to any questions which people might have.
I hope I was clear and didn't confuse people much.
You're clear, but the process is technical, so maybe it needs a one-on-one or a repeat of the session.
Which we can definitely arrange as part of the KCSFA sessions as well then.
Thank you very much.
Any questions, guys?
I guess it was clear then to everyone. I can give people assignments.
Either it was very clear or people were very lost.
So basically what I've shown is how targeted ransomware groups are operating and what they call advanced persistent threats. So this is how they're able to then bypass your antiviruses, or if you have EDRs, not all EDRs can be bypassed with what I've shown, but definitely some of those that leverage the common hooking tools, these are techniques you can use to bypass those. I can see a question. What are the materials for a beginner reverse engineer or malware analyst? For one, you need to definitely have a lab or an environment where you're going to be running your payloads in. So like these payloads that I do are not on my live machines, but in my virtual machines. So if I was doing reverse engineering, especially of a payload that I have not created, I would suggest having Windows lab, or I mean, again, depending on the type of malware you're trying to reverse engineer. There are also specific labs that are out there, or certain virtual machines that have all the tools, just like how you have Kali Linux for pen testing, which comes pre-built with specific tools that a pen tester would need. There are also these reverse engineering environments. That's not my exact field of forte, so I cannot guide you directly to what would be the right one to use. But if you do a bit of Googling, I believe you should be able to find what would be the right way of going about this. I do know there is an individual, I think, by the name Matt. He's also known as Husky Hacks on Twitter. He's actually doing like a whole reverse engineering malware analysis tutorial. So he'll be somebody to look out and see how he sets up his environment and goes about reverse engineering various types of malware. And there are also a lot of YouTube channels that are out there. So definitely resources are quite available. For Android, can one use new languages such as Kotlin to write the malware? Honestly speaking, I am I'm not much on the mobile side of things when it comes to offensive operations. So I cannot give you a solid answer on that. I do know that people who have been working on exploits on Android, the ones that at least I've seen, have been very Java oriented. I know Kotlin is used to write Android applications. So there is a possibility that you can then weaponize it based on the type of maybe procedures or functions that you want your application to do on your target or victim. As a beginner in cybersecurity, what is your advice in technical point of view? The first thing I'd say is, if you're getting into cybersecurity, it can be a very daunting environment, especially if you're going on the technical side of things, because as you've clearly heard me even saying, I'm not good at when it comes to mobile, because you cannot be an expert in all technologies and architectures. So for me, I focus a lot on Windows side of things. But if you're venturing into the scene and you're not too sure of what you'd want to do, I recommend most of the people to try out all different areas. Go into Linux, get into Windows, get into Mac, do web exploitation, do Android exploitation, do iPhone exploitation, get into also hardware, get into protocols. I mean, it's very large, and that's why I say sometimes I may tell you get into Windows, but then that's what I enjoy doing, but it may not be the same for you. You might be enjoying doing mobile. So that's why for beginners, I encourage you to try out all the different places, because even I have done a little bit of everything, but since I've been doing system administration for Windows environments in corporates, it has been my strength. So I focus a lot on that area. Any WhatsApp group link to easily reach you guys? Okay, I think that one can be answered by the KCSFA reps. Hello, there's someone on that call?
I've talked to him, he will send it to me. It's okay.
Any other questions? How does Defender go? Okay, so on the last exploit that I showed, that is already bypassed Defender. So I think my screen is still shared. I can show you when I was actually compiling this yesterday and trying to see it against various other antiviruses. I took a screenshot of this yesterday. I think it was yesterday evening. Yeah. As you can see, this was yesterday around 8 p.m. I'd compiled the Go exploit into an executable, and basically only 5 antivirus engines or antiviruses could detect it. So basically I could bypass all this, meaning it's now upon whoever is developing. If you're on the attack side, which is the seat I usually sit on, then my objective is to ensure I can be able to bypass these. The defenders on the other side, because I said this is a more of an advanced technique. So if you're running any of like this, let's say, for example, you're running McAfee or Kaspersky, this payload will definitely go by and bypass it without any problems. But now, as a defender, how can you still ensure that you do not fall victim, or if this exploit gets executed on your machine, how can you then at least stop it from causing further chaos? Or now you see, like once I have command and control, I can then probably execute something that will encrypt your data, and therefore that's what we call ransomware. So I can now send ransomware, do a ransomware attack on the device. So at least the first step may get bypassed, but then you could possibly be able to detect and mitigate the next part, which is me executing the ransomware. But for that, just your good old antivirus will not work. You need to then now move into the next phase of things, which is called EDR, endpoint detection and response, or now the new buzzword or buzz terminology is XDR, whereby it's not, you're integrating your endpoint detection response telemetry with also your network. So also your firewall and everything is sending logs to a central space, which you can now monitor, and based on rules. So that's where your machine learning and AI sort of thing comes into play. You can set up rules that if certain specific activity is happening, either, block the machine, kick it out of the network, or disconnect it from internet. So for me to run my ransomware, for example, I would have to then now execute something that will fetch another file or execute it in memory. Now, I may have bypassed, let's say, McAfee that would be on this machine, or in this case, Windows Defender. But if I have an EDR also installed, like let's say CrowdStrike or Sophos, it will now bypass, as you can see, I think even this one bypasses Sophos. Yes. So I could have Sophos EDR running on this machine and Sophos antivirus. This payload will bypass Sophos antivirus, but the EDR should detect it. Then again came about, remember when I was developing the payload, I also mentioned that some of the techniques that this payload is using is a way of bypassing also EDR. So in this game, it's a cat and mouse. It's like the thief is always trying to be ahead of the police. And the police is always, so it's always like a cat and mouse. And so one team finds a technique, it's used for a couple of months, and then the defenders have found ways of mitigating it. So now again, the attackers look for another way of doing it. So it's an evolving game. So what I showed you, maybe in another 6 months may not be possible, because again, the developers of the blue side and defense tools are constantly also trying to enhance their detection mechanisms and stop these kind of exploits from running. So that's why we also say sometimes these exploits have a shelf life. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, you can talk to us at MacroSec. We do these kind of advanced detection tooling. So maybe also for KCSFA, we might showcase that even if you're able to bypass Windows Defender, what sort of tooling and solutions you can use to be able to block or at least mitigate these kind of threats from spreading further into your corporate networks. Yes, we actually offer internships. At the moment, we don't have a space, but do check in with us and I will share my contacts with people. Or you can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we can definitely work on something together. in your view, how would you gauge the efforts made locally to defend against such attacks, especially in SMEs? Honestly speaking, with my experience with SMEs, very minimum, because a lot of people, a lot of what do you call it, system administrators and generally our IT officers in Kenya, I would say, have a very like laid back approach when it comes to security. So they think the use of like, you know, an antivirus and a firewall is good enough to protect their networks. But definitely if someone comes with such kind of exploits like I showed you, then those defenses are not going to do much for you, because as I said, as you saw, even my command and control is running on port 80, which is usually a port that firewalls allow. So ingress allows me to then communicate back out of the network. So irrespective of you having a firewall and keeping stringent rules around it, I would possibly be able to bypass your firewall and your antivirus. So I have full command and control to at least one machine in your network. I can share my Twitter. So it's, I think it's also on my first slide. Yeah, that's my Twitter handle at the top there. Hello. Are we still here? Are we done?
Yes, we are still here.
We're still hoping that you have more to tell us.
If there are questions, I'm very happy to share. So fire away. I'm still here.
Right. Clive. Did Clive hand over his roles?
I think it's Harriet.
Oh, it's Harriet. It's Harriet. Harriet,
Hello,
are you there?
hello.
I think
I'm
the
there,
time
I'm
is
there.
up, so
Presenter
we can
wants
hand
to
over
say
to Harriet.
off.
Yeah, I was waiting for Varun to hand over the session because it was him running that session. So thank you so much, Majid. That was quite technical. Here I can see some people have seen stars. And, I would say that was very, very deep. Of course, I believe that if we were patient enough, we will be able to get the hack of it. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, and we look forward to having more sessions where you can slowly take us through these again. It's quite interesting to see how these things are done. Yeah, and I can see now, at least because of time, people are running out. We promised we'll finish at 5:20, and we are quite on time. I will not want to take a lot of your time, but just thank you so much. Thank you, and we hope to see you soon again when we organize the next conference. At this moment, I want to hand over to Kenny's, the chair, so that he can say a word or two as we come to the end of the online conference. Kenny, I hand over to you.
I sort of thought you were going to finish, but then it's all right.
I can't finish.
Well,
I can't finish.
This has been an action-packed session, but as we all know, everything must come to an end. And, one thing I have to admit, honestly, there was a lot of content, and maybe now that we're beginning October Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we can think broadly, how do we now make these issues simpler, simplified so that most people can become aware. Cyrus gave us a good snippet of what basically happened, We love what Evelyn also told us about the cybersecurity, child online awareness issues. And now that we're coming to today, people tend to talk the shell codes, how you can bypass all that. And now those who are wondering what offensive security is all about, I think Labu has done well. We'll just tell you, welcome on board. In KCSFA, we have so much. And our mantra here is about connecting with the experts. And who taught the first teacher? Your answer is as good as mine. They began at some point, and I think we are on that road to become an expert. So can we just purpose to be experts together? Until next time, I think Harriet will be having these sessions. It will be on quarterly basis, and if there was a poll running, so that again also inform how we engage after another quarter, so that we create more awareness that can result in actionable points, and even that people can use at the right time and at the right places. Without much ado, guys, thank you and God bless you till we meet again next time.